What's happened there?
Good evening, guys. I'll just give this a few moments to catch up as always. And we are live. We'll get this shared out to my page, and then from my page I'll pin that to the top as per usual, and then here we go. Right, guys, we'll just tag Al in this. Do. As always, the chat will be run by my who does a great job for so many people, I have to say. Here we go. And that is shared to Al's page. Hi guys. Sorry about all that. As always, thanks to my sponsors, City Clothing, and Mr. James Jeffries. Tonight we have on his first ever podcast, Mr. Al McIntosh, and Al is going to share about his life, some of his time on this earth, and how he changed his life around after a life of crime. Hi mate, thanks for coming on. It's great to finally get you on.
Thank you for having me on, Jack.
It's great. Let's take you back to the start, mate. And you know how you grew up, where you grew up, and how you got into sort of a life of crime.
Yes, well, I was born in Glasgow, 1955, which makes me 66 years of age. My parents had 9 children, 6 boys, 3 girls. There was a set of triplets in amongst the kids, and a set of twins. I grew up in a place called the Cowcaddens, which was a sort of a slum area in Glasgow, you know, very desolate, very rough, very working class, but also semi-criminal classes as well, petty thieves, quite a violent little area, you know what I mean? And it was that was the sort of environment I was brought up in. My parents, my mother had mental health issues, you know. My father was an alcoholic. I mean, when I say an alcoholic, I mean a terrible alcoholic that became addicted in the end to belly or hair lacquer. He used to put milk in it, mix up the hair lacquer, and get stoned on it. When he did work, he never spent any money on his kids. He would leave us to go hungry. You know, he was a coal man by trade. Sometimes he was working as a dustman. That was the way he made his living when he did work, which was very, very rare. So really, it was a case of living in poverty, always hungry, never any food in the house, and a very violent environment where my father would regularly beat my mother up. And when I say beat her up, he's broken a leg, he's broken nose, you know what I mean, regularly beating her up because my mother was always screaming for money for the food, you know, that he was supposed to provide, which he never did. He would rather spend his money in the pub, the local pub, or any pub for that matter, and see his kids go hungry, which we did on a regular basis. You know what I mean? There was never nothing to eat in the house. You know, the electricity was always getting cut off. There was never any gas. This was the sort of the environment that we were brought up in. Us 9 kids slept in one room. The 3 girls slept in one bed covered in coats. Me and my other 5 brothers, we slept in another bed covered in coats. And it was a bed that was held up by beer crates but there was no proper bed. It was just an old metal stands thing, mattress on a bunch of beer crates, covering old coats, always hungry, always cold. And that was the sort of environment that we were brought up in. My father would come in drunk every night, God knows where he got the money, because half the time he wasn't working, with nothing to eat. And my mother, would like jump him, where is the money for the kids, etc. He wouldn't care, he'd beat her up. And then when he fell asleep, my mother would attack him with a hammer or a horseshoe. She always carried a horseshoe in her handbag, you know what I mean? And she would get me involved. I was like 8 or 9 at the time, you know what I mean? So we'd wait for my father to come in, steaming drunk. Then we would jump him, knock him into the bathroom, go through his pocket, see if he had any money, which he didn't really have much, you know what I mean? Tuppence here, threepence here, a couple of pennies. And he was unconscious with alcohol. My mother would hit him with hammers. Well, she would hit him with anything under the sun, you know what I mean? But it never worked with that guy. He didn't care. I remember once in 1968, there was one onion in the house to feed 9 kids. Think of that, Jack, an onion. This was the sort of man he was. He didn't care. He was so steeped in alcoholism. That's all he ever thought of. And he was regularly taken off to the asylum. You know what I mean? My mother would phone the police, or the asylum guys would come in. My father was a very powerful man. And when I say powerful, he was a local Glasgow hard man sort of a thing. People were terrified of him, by the way. And so when the people from the hospital, the mental health hospital, came to get him, he always fought. It took about 6 of them to get him in the van and into the van, forcing straight jackets on him. Then they would have to sedate him with a needle to get this man into the van. And he would normally spend about 28 days in these hospitals. Then he would be released again. And the cycle just continued and continued and continued. And this was the sort of environment that we were brought up with. But of course, my mother was no angel herself. Even though she was getting these wicked, wicked beatings, she would then take it out on their kids. 2 of them in particular, Willie and Beth, they would get hit with dog chains. They would get hit with golf clubs. She would pull Beth's hair off, keep her off of school, because she had deep psychological problems as well. But she was completely teetotal. So this was the sort of thing that was going on all the time. Social workers were always turning up at the door. And my mother would sort of make me pretend that nothing was going on. She had me well versed with these people. No, this doesn't happen. My mum doesn't hit us. She was always known as Mammy. It was Mammy we called her. And this was the sort of thing that were always there. And sometimes we'd be taken into, not custody, but put into sort of children's homes for a day or 2 or a week or 2. Then it would be back again. My mum and dad would make up, but everything always resorted back to the way it always was. My dad would get off the drink for a couple of days, go to work. But as soon as wage day came, you'd never see him. My mother always sent me up the Gascoigne Road, which is in the Cowcaddens, bordering on Postal Park, area in Glasgow. And I would stand there on a Friday waiting for him to get his wages. And I would say things, look, Dad, Mum said you've got to, well, Mammy said you've got to come home. You have to come home, Dad. There's nothing to eat. She told me to tell you that there is no food in the house. And he would take me to the local pub and say, wait a minute, son, I'm just going to go in and change a £5 note. He would go in one door and out the next door. You wouldn't see him again. So my life was always going around all the pubs in the Cowcaddens, trying to find this man to get money, to sort of to get food. He knew his kids were going hungry and he didn't care. Then he would come home, beat the mother up again. He never lifted his finger to his kids. He always beat my mother up. But when he was so drunk at sometimes, he would go out in the street and he would call my mum every dirty name under the sun. And he would throw bricks through the window, knowing fine well that his kids were in there. That shattered glass could have cut us, it could have killed us. He didn't care. He was so steeped in alcoholism that the only thing that he was interested in was where his next bottle of wine came from. Wine was his poison of choice. 4 Crown wine. He had that tattooed on his hand, 4 crowns. That was for the love of his wine. And that's what he was like all the time. He didn't care. He was a man who had no compassion whatsoever for his own family. All he was interested was in wine. Anything in the house was sold. Now, I mean, anything at all. I remember one day we had an old black and white television. That was the only pleasure that we had in that house. And they came in one day pretending, oh, it's broken, I need to take it to get fixed. And they took it away and sold it for a couple of quid just for the price of alcohol, knowing fine well that those kids have had, that's all we had, that television. We didn't have any furniture. We sat on the floor. We might be sitting in an old coat or a cushion or a blanket. You know what I mean? That sort of a thing. That was the environment that I was brought up in. And as I said, my mother, I mean, it pains me deeply to say this about my father and mother. But when I think of all the decent people who cannot have children, and that pair of wastrels went and had 9 children between them, that hurts me badly to say that I never had a real mother and father. But that's what they were like. And then, of course, my mother would bring me into her battles. We would wait. I can still see me with a claw hammer at 8 years of age. And I had to hit him with a claw hammer. And my mother would have beat the living tar out of us, you know what I mean? Either with a dog chain. Sometimes she would hit her kids with a golf club. I mean, she was mentally unbalanced, this woman, you know what I mean? And this was the environment that us kids were brought up in all the time. Nothing, always hungry. I was always out in the Midlands. You know what I mean? Anybody from Glasgow will know what I mean when I say, like, we used to go raking the Midlands, which is a Scottish word for dustbins. To find what was in there, I would find rags. Woolens were the prize. Then you could take them to the rag and bone man. You get a couple of shillings, and I would go and buy a loaf of bread. I would go and buy, you know, maybe a pint of milk or something. So really, at a very early age, it was me who was providing for my family, not my father. He provided nothing, you know what I mean, except hassle, something, you know what I mean, violence. You know what I mean? He was a terrible man. He was a terrible father. And, you know what I mean? And he didn't really deserve to be on this earth, that sort of a man, because all he ever cared for was himself. He cared but nobody but himself, you know what I mean? So that was the sort of environment that we were brought up. I remember, I mean, as I said, I'm 66. I remember on Christmas Eve 1959, when I was only 4, and my mother was crying. Her heart, you know what I mean? Her heart was sort of like broken. You know what I mean? I can up on Christmas Eve, I can still see the stockings, you know, Christmas stockings up on the mantelpiece, and there was nothing in it. And she was crying that there was nothing for her kids, etc. And I didn't really understand, because I thought, well, it's Christmas time. Everybody's going to have to get Christmas presents, but there were none. And you know what I mean? I felt sort of hurt, you know what I mean, that I was getting nothing. I didn't understand really why we were getting nothing. But it was down to him drinking the money again, you know what I mean? And I came down on Christmas Eve, come down, nothing there. And I never saw my mother. And I went into the kitchen, her head was in the gas oven. She'd switched the gas on, you know what I mean? And I remember pulling her out, mommy, crying, opening up the doors, opening up all the windows. And that's what saved her life, you know what I mean? So there she was. That was Christmas Day, 1959 for me. After that, as I started to get a little bit older, I started, you know what I mean, going around to people's houses and, you know, begging what they say in Glasgow, ginger bottles. That's a collective word for bottles of pop. It could be a Coca-Cola bottle. It could be a bottle of Iron Brew. You used to get money back on your refundable bottles. And you'd go up there and say, "You any bottles?" They would give you these bottles. You would take them back at the shop. You'd maybe get a couple of pennies for it. And I would try and buy milk and bread and all that. And I started to become very entrepreneurial. My little mind started to get used to trying to get money to feed the family, you know what I mean? And then I would go into old houses and rip up floorboards and break them up into bunches of sticks and go around all the doors and knock on the door and say, like, I mean, it was, if I remember right, it was like threepence for a bag of sticks in those days, you know what I mean? So I would sell them for a penny. And if I come back, we say like 2 shillings or something, which is about 20 pence in today's money. But 2 shillings could get you a pint of milk, maybe a little bit of bread, a little bit of cheese, whatever. And that would keep us going. And of course, I would go around all the butcher shops, saying to the butcher, "Have you got a bone for a dog?" And you would give you bones, you know what I mean, with a little bit of meat in it, and I would take it back. My mother would cook it on the fire. Because as I said, half the time the electricity was never on. We couldn't afford to pay the bills. So she would make a pot of soup out of these bones and any vegetables that I'd bought. And that pot of soup would last the whole family for about 3 days, which was quite common in Glasgow with a lot of people by the poor in those days, that you would soup would last 2 or 3 days. And that's what kept us going. And me, sort of like, I hadn't actually started stealing anything then, you know what I mean? I was still basically getting money that way. I can still see my mother waking me up and saying, "Look, Alan, son, there's nothing to eat in the house again. Go out and see if you can find anything." And then I would go into the Midlands, and I started going up to the west end of Glasgow. which was sort of like where people like doctors lived and solicitors lived and judges, and they threw out a better standard of rubbish, if I can put it that way. You would go in there and you might find an old television, or you might find an old lighter. And I was always astonished that people could throw out a lighter at work, or even an old television that could work. I would take it back. I would start to sell it around the streets and all that. Maybe I'd get sale at 20 pence or something for it. Know what I mean? Or maybe 50 pence. Although that was 10 bob in those days. If you get 10 bob, you were rich. Know what I mean? And I would do these sort of things. Know what I mean? And then I'd be looking for scrap. You go into the old houses, see if you can get a bit of copper wire, that sort of a thing. So that's how we were living at the beginning, that sort of a thing, to get money for food, because there was nothing. There was nothing in that house. We never had a penny. Of that man, my mother was on what they used to call in those days the national assistance. She got what was known as a Monday book, which was £1 or £2, you know what I mean? But that never lasted, you know what I mean? She had 9 kids. It just didn't last, you know what I mean? And my mum was a complete teetotaler. She never drunk in her life, by the way. Of course, he would come in. If he disappeared for 2 or 3 days, he always turned up in the Monday, because he knew my mother got the Monday book then. And he'd come in and just forcibly take it off her, slap her, come home drunk. But my mother always got a revenge when he came back at night time. He'd come in, steaming drunk. My mother, leaving behind the doorway with the claw hammer, would whack into him. My mother always carried a horseshoe in her handbag. By Christ, she would hit anybody with that horseshoe. So that's how she got him back. She would attack him. But he was so paralytic, drunk, he never even felt a thing. And when he was living in the house, as I said, he was only there a little while, and the people from the asylum would come and take him away. You know what I mean? I'd come home from school, and if I heard a song, maybe the older generation will remember a song called "Oh, they're coming to take me away, ha ha, ho 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 he." My mother would put that song on, and when I heard that coming home from school, I knew those people with the white coats were there for him. Off he went, put up a fight, as usual, a big fight, a struggle. They would chuck him into the back of the van, they would sedate him, and off he went again. And then times he was in the house, he'd be screaming because he'd been in the army. The Germans are coming. There's a German coming out the wall. I had to run round with a shoe and kill this German that was coming out the wall. Or go to the other side of the wall and kill another German. His mind was completely gone. The man was sort of like the mental health issues with that guy because of alcohol was tremendous. It really was. We used to go up and visit him in the hospital. I remember one day we were lying there and he saw spiders coming out the wall, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. I never saw any spiders. There's one there, son, get him. And I'd have to pretend to kill the spider. Is it dead, Dad? No, that one's still alive. That one's still alive. So there was me about 8 or 9 running all around the hospital, the mental, you're sort of like the mental health hospital, killing non-existent spiders. This is what he was like, by the way, then. But he always got released. He always came back out. Then he would start work again for a couple of days. And then I would be back up waiting for him for his wages. And he would never pay nothing. And sometimes I'd hang about all night. In fact, as an 8-year-old child, I got to know so many pubs in Glasgow as much as my dad. It was like it was like a hound dog following the trail. I'd get in as my dad, you've just missed your dad, son. He's away to such and such a pub. I'd go in that pub, you just missed him, son. He's away to that. So I was going round pubs after pubs after pubs after pubs, looking for this guy. You know what I mean? One night I got up there and there was a pub in the Gascoigne Road. It was called Griffin's Bar. I always remember that name, but it was locally known as the Ponderosa, after the old cowboy. Maybe the older generation will remember Bonanza. It used to be on, and they had a sort of like a ranch in there called the Ponderosa, which was a bit of a cowboy place. And that's why this pub got the name of the Ponderosa, because it was all cowboys in there fighting. And I remember up looking for him one day, and I remember saying, as my dad in the pub, just at that moment, the door bust up and my dad came out, and he was fighting with this guy, and this guy hit my dad right in the face with an axe and opened his face right down the side of his face. It was, I couldn't believe it. And I panicked and jumped on this man's back to try to help my dad. The guy just swatted me off like it was a fly, like it was nothing. I banged my head against the wall. But my father, as I said, hit with an axe. I know was an incredibly powerfully strong man, and grabbed this guy and nearly half killed him, smashed him with the axe again. And I was just standing watching this, and I thought, my God, what is all this that's going on? You know what I mean? And he had a huge, as I said, a huge big scar in his face. The police came, he was taken away, the two of them were charged. I think my dad got a bit of time in prison or something through it. Well, both of them did, not I mean, for attacking each other. And that was the sort of like life that I was brought up with. I mean, it was constant. It was, never ending. And of course, we were the talk of the street. I mean, it was a very poor area, Jack. I mean, I lived in a street called Scotia Street. I mean, and in the Cookhaddens. And even though the people there were sort of like not a lot of money, not a lot of work, and the people that did work sort of looked down on us. We were the scum of the earth. I mean, we were the sort of people that the mums and dad would say, keep away from him, keep away from him. I don't want you near that family, keep away from them. So we were like pariahs. We were the talk of the town, if you want to put it. Because my father was always out in the street, throwing bricks through the window, calling my mother all the cows under the sun. I mean, to call a woman a cow in Glasgow is like calling her a slag in England. It's a big, big, bad, nasty thing to do. So I'd have to put up with that. And of course, the next day, the kids would hear the commotion that had been on the night before, and they'd be calling me this, and then fighting. I was always fighting this one, and I get better at it, and I get more and more violent at it. You know what I mean? So I'd be fighting this guy and fighting that guy and fighting this guy because what they were saying about my mother, etc., etc., etc. So that is a good ground in what was going on in my life when I was a child. You know what I mean? And sort of like, as I said, as I started to go up to these really rich houses, you know what I mean, and places like that to sort of to see what they had. And some of these dustbins, I was fascinated. They had padlocks on their dustbins. And I used to think, man, who puts a padlock on their dustbin? There must be something really, really worth, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like taking out of those dustbins, you know what I mean? But of course, it was nothing. It was just rich people who decided they had padlocks because they couldn't stand the likes of me coming into their backyards and raiding their dustbins. And it was a case of like, this is, you know what I mean? You see what you could find and all that, you know what I mean? And then I would take it. But there's a place in Glasgow called Paddy's Market, which is a street. I don't know if it's still there now, but back in the 60s it was. It was a place where all Glasgow's poor went to buy whatever was there, an old pair of shoes. It'd been found, you know what I mean, a dress, anything. And people like me were finding things in the dustbins. And I would take it to Paddy's Market and sell it to my Uncle George. My Uncle George had a little sort of like pitch down there, and he would sell it out to the poor for 2 or 3 shillings at a time. And I would get a couple of shillings off him, and I would get back home, buy bread again, buy milk or anything like that. Never sweets. You couldn't afford sweets, you know what I mean? And sort of like, so that was basically the very, very young life that I had, you know what I mean? And so that's what we were doing to sort of like, to get money, you know what I mean? And then one day, like myself and my brother Brian, we were out one day, and this was literally, you've heard it fell off the back of a lorry. Well, this did actually do fall off the back of a lorry. We were going up in a parcel that fell off a truck. It was going into a sort of like a distribution centre or a factory, and there was a box of chocolates. Oh, and when I opened it up, it was Mars bars and all that sort of a thing, you know what I mean? And I thought, wow, look at this. That was the first time we'd ever eaten a Mars bar in our life. Me and my brother Brian, we'd ate it. And it was a big box. We'd ate another couple. Then we started to get sick. I mean. And then I had an idea to sell them. And I took them back to the street. And I sold all these Mars bars for like, you know, a quarter of the price that they're selling in the shop. So for the first time in my life, I had a right few shillings in my pocket. I was so pleased. I went out and bought more food. Bread, potatoes. And I remember that day well. It was really fantastic that I had so much food. My mother was so proud of me. I told her I'd found these chocolate, and it was great. But of course, you can't find chocolate all the time. But that gave me the idea that, wait a minute, I've got all this money for finding all these chocolates. So we went back up, like kids being naive, hoping to find another box of chocolates. But there was no other box of chocolates. So we broke into the place. Really, it was just a wall. Jump over the wall. There was a truck there. We opened back of the truck, stole a couple of boxes of chocolate and legged it away. That was the start of my thieving. You know what I mean? We started doing this on a regular basis. I started to get more and more money. It was never big money, Jack. It was sort of like if we managed to pick a couple of pounds up in one day, that was a right result. And even that was rare. But we were making at least £1, £1.50 a day. But that was enough to feed us. It was enough to get milk and bread And sort of like my mother was sort of like proud of us. She had no idea that we were stealing. I was still making out that I was ripping up floorboards and selling bits of wood as fire stick. Still said I was finding rags and wool and all that sort of, and taking it to the rag and bone man to get money. But that's how I started stealing. We started doing it on a regular basis, and it was great. We were chocolates here, but of course that can't last forever. You know what I mean? Because you know, like they're going to find out sooner or later, and they saw us one day and they chased us and all that. I mean, but by this time I had got a taste for stealing. I realised that, you know, that life wasn't going to do me any favours. By the way, I had to take life by the scruff of the neck. And I did take it with the scruff of the neck. So we started, I always remember we started going back up the west end of Glasgow, where all the posh people lived, all the big houses and all that, the doctors, the solicitors, all these people, you know what I mean? And like we got to their house to see what we get. You know what I mean? I remember one day we broke into this solicitor's house and we get £15. Oh my God, £15. I could not believe that that sort of money existed in the whole world. 15 quid. We were so pleased. Me and my brother Brian went back, we split it up, you know what I mean, made out to my mum. We sort of like found it in the street and all that, and that £15 kept us going for a couple of weeks, you know what I mean? But I had the taste then, and it was exciting. It was great getting into these big posh houses, seeing all these things. I mean, I could not believe that people could live like that. People had that sort of a money. So we started screwing their houses, and I mean, going up all the time, breaking in, coming out with sort of like whatever we could find, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Whatever it was, money or anything that was worth selling, like small items like lighters, maybe gold pencils, that sort of a thing. We'd get back. We started to make more and more money. We started to be able to afford shoes and all that, maybe a pair of trousers, things that we could never ever afford at all at one time. Life was starting to get a little bit better for us, by the way, and I was getting addicted to it. My brother Brian was more of a sort of a follower of men, where I was a leader. All the ideas came from me, and Brian always followed me, and I was getting addicted to it. I thought, this is a life for me. This is what I want to do. I don't want to be a butcher or a baker or a candlesticks maker. This was a life for me, and that was the start of all my thieving. Poverty, brought up in poverty, to sort of like to feed myself. That's why we done it. That's what it. But of course, it got beyond that. You know what I mean? And we had sort of like this carried on for about, I don't know, I was 8. We started stealing about 8. You know what I mean? That sort of age. And eventually, like I get captured. You know what I mean? Eventually, all good things come to an end. And there I was in the court in Glasgow, 9 years of age. I mean, the age of responsibility in Scotland back in the 60s was 8 years of age. So if you were caught after, you know what I mean, you were going to sort of like court. So up we get. My mother was utterly shocked when she found out. I mean, I'd get caught, and it was another solicitor. I climbed up scaffold and broke into the place, you know what I mean, and get caught with the men on the scaff, and how I begged, please let me go, mister, we're just playing on the scaffold. No, that'll be right. They knew we were thieves, so they held on. The police took us back, and that was the beginning. We were taken to court, and I was given 3 years probation. You know what I mean? So that was my first criminal conviction at 9 years of age. My brother Brian got away, and I never grasped him. I just kept to the code of you say nothing, you know what I mean? And that was it. So 9 years of age, I got 3 years probation, but I never done one single day of it because my mother moved from the Kirkcaldies the day after it, and we went to another place called Springburn. So we'd moved out. I mean, you know, so I never done one single day of that, the probation. But of course, I just carried on as I said, no, I was addicted. There was no way ever, there was no chance that I was ever going to get a job. This is what I liked doing. I enjoyed doing it. It was an exciting life, and I thought it was marvelous. And it was money. It wasn't big money. It was a couple of pounds here, a couple of pounds there. So we started, when I went to Springburn, I just carried on. And from the age, we carried on, we started to break into bigger factories. We'd steal crates of beer. We would break into sort of like television. We used to go look out. I don't know if you've heard of the M8 motorway. That was pulling down all the houses in Glasgow at the time. And what we was doing is, there used to be TV shops and all that, by the way. You know what I mean? So we would break into the TV shop. We'd go into sort of like the house next door, go down into the basement, knock a hole through the wall, come up the basement in the TV shop and started selling televisions and stereos and all that. So my plans were getting bigger and bigger. We were no longer stealing boxes of Mars bars. We were stealing TVs and stereo units and all that. And we were making a right few quid selling them all around the area. And then you got bumped with our friends. The Rag and Bone man that I used to take, you know what I mean? The Rag and Bones, he was also a Fens. My Uncle Tommy put me on to him. So this guy will buy anything. So I was starting to get £2, £3, £4, £5, £6, £10 even a day then. It was bigger money then. Still only peanuts if you think, what's £10, £15 a day? But to a 13, 12-year-old, it was a lot of money. So we carried on like this, for the next 4 years until I was caught again. You know what I mean? It was a church. I get caught in the church. I mean, God must have been looking after his own that day. We used to break into a lot of churches until you get football strips and all that. We'd take the football strips and we'd sell them on. It was a good money maker. We were breaking into everything. We were taking lead off church roofs. We were breaking into TV shop. We were breaking into goods wagons, the British Rail and all that. We were doing well. I mean, I remember one day we came running out with a big box that was full of condoms. And we were blowing them up like balloons and letting them go off everywhere. You know what I mean? It was great fun. It was excitement. Sometimes you would be in a factory and the night watchman would be just round the corner and you'd be hiding just out his way, hoping he didn't catch you, that sort of thing. I get really addicted to it. You know what I mean? It became a buzz to me. You know what I mean? So we enjoyed it. And then, as I said, I was 13 when we finally get caught again. And in the church, we were going down a disused railway station. And I thought I seen a policeman behind me. There was 4 of us. We were carrying crates, and it was full of football strips. It was all Rangers Football Club strips. So we knew a lot of Rangers fans that were going to buy these. And I thought I saw somebody in a bush just behind me. And I looked round, and he jumped into the bush again. And I thought, I must be imagining thing. As I walked up a little bit, I saw somebody in front of me with a black uniform on. I thought, I'm imagining it, but I wasn't. It was a police. They'd seen as somebody had phoned, followed us a little bit, waited till the police car came and pointed us down at the old disused railway. It's one of these old railways that had been there in Victorian times, but all the tracks had been taken up and it had been overcovered in grass and moss and all that. So we made a run for it and I jumped over a wall, but I run straight into a lamppost and knocked myself out. So then I was lying on the ground. So when I woke up, I was in the police station, back up to court. This time they gave me 3 years. You know what I mean? And in a proof school, a place called Thornley Park. It was a hellhole of a place, you know what I mean? So I was in there like 3 years. I always remember that first day that, they take you out and they show you off to all the new kids. Everybody was standing in sort of like army uniforms. I mean, by the way, when they gave me the 3 years, it was for 110 burglaries, what they call housebreaking. So this had been going on since 8 till they caught me at 13. So we're talking about a 5-year spree for 110 burglaries. I really was a child phenomenon. I really was. And so I get 3 years for it. And that day when they took me to the, the approved school, they put you on the steps, big concrete steps to show you off. You're the new boy and everybody is looking at you. And it was very intimidating. People were running their hands across their throat when they cut your throat or running their hands down their finger saying you're getting a Mars bar, which is a Glasgow word for a scar and all that. And it was very, very, very intimidating. You look at them and they all had shorts on and army type jackets and all that. And there was, somebody would shout out, you're going to get this and you're going to get that and you're getting this. So it was a very intimidating environment to be in. And whereabouts I didn't like it, I wasn't all that bothered because I was a tough little kid. I could take care of myself. So I just thought, well, I'll get my head down. Hopefully everything will be okay. And eventually I'm going to get out of this place. But it didn't work out like that. You know what I mean? So you get back in and dismiss me. So I'm walking about, I've still got my ordinary clothes on. Everybody's in the sort of with the army type clothes on, right? And they deliberately let you keep your clothes on for the first couple of hours so everybody in the yard could see that you were the new boy, and they would come up and they would touch your jacket and say you're this or you're a poof and all that. Sorry to use language like that, but that's what they would say, you know what I mean? And this and that, and you're going to get that, and when you're sleeping tonight, you're going to get your brains bashed in. It was a very, very intimidating environment. And these were all people from 13 to 15 in this place. And Thornley Park at that time was one of the most notorious approved schools, and it was just outside Glasgow. You had to be one tough little kid to take care of yourself in there. And luckily enough for me, by the way, like I could take care of myself, but I didn't want to take care of myself. I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to get out. I didn't want to really break any rules. I wanted to get in and get out as quick as possible. But I knew I was going nowhere. I was there for 3 years. You know what I mean? That's what it was. I was sentenced to 3 years. I mean, you know, you got off with a good behaviour, but you've got to do that good behaviour, Jack, by the way. You know what I mean? So I'm in there, by the way. And then, like, as I said, it was a house. It was a hellhole. And I remember that first night, we're all sitting at it was a big, long table. We got our tea, you know, the food came in. Nobody could touch it. We all had to sit there with our arms folded. And all the food was always on the table before you come in. There'd be plates with bread on it, that sort of a thing. A big, massive pewter TV pot. There'd be food. Everybody, you know what I mean? And all the food, the plate would be in front of you, but all the food was down the middle of the table, but nobody could touch it. But the boys touched it. They called it dickieing. Somebody would spit on a bit of bread, or somebody would, you know, put a spit on their finger and touch it. So everybody was dickieing their food. That's what they called it, dickieing it. So that nobody would touch it. Nobody's going to touch food like if it's all been spat on or dickied. You know what I mean? And so that first night, it happened so quick. There was no food for me, because everybody had dickied it, and nobody's going to eat food, as I said, because somebody spat on it. But that's what everybody done in that Apu school. It was a way to make sure you got your food. So I went hungry that night. The exact same thing happened at breakfast time the next day. Back in again, as soon as the food was done, everybody dickied it again, spat on it, touched on it, nothing again. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm going to have to up my game here, by the way, I'm going to starve. So when dinner time came that night, I spat on a potato. I put my spit on a bit of bread and all that, by the way. So nobody touched it. So you have to sort of like conform with the rules. And that's what happened every single day that I was in there. It never changed. We didn't call them screws, they were called masters, these guys. You know what I mean? Masters, you know what I mean? And like, so that was it. And like, the idea was like, in the dining room, they had a huge big board up on the wall. And it went from 1 year to 3 years, and it all had different colours on the board: green, red, orange, signifying a 3-month period. And there was peg holes in it. So your first week, the peg went in. The second week, another peg moved in. So you moved up till you got to 3 months. Once you got to 3 months, if you behaved yourself, you were let out for a couple of days, maybe the odd weekend, but you had to go 3 months first with good behaviour before you were even considered. And trust me, Jack, watching that little peg been up a hole week after week. I've been in 2 weeks now. I've been in 3 weeks now. Do you get to that 12 weeks? And you've got to behave yourself. You've got to do what everybody says, the masters and all that, by the way. You know what I mean? And of course, at the same time, the massive bullying that was going on. So you had to be very, very careful what you done. The boys had a habit of giving you what they called a dead leg. You'd be standing there, not expecting nothing, and all of a sudden somebody would run up, knee you right on the thigh, and down you went in agony. It was called a dead leg. And I remember I was always wondering when it was going to happen to me, because I'm a very quiet kid, Jack. I was a very quiet man also as an adult until you annoyed me. It's only when you got on the wrong side of me that I would start on you. But in general, I'm quite a quiet guy, you know what I mean? And one day it happened to me. I was standing there, and I just felt this incredible pain in my thigh, and I went down on the floor, and I thought I was going to spew up. I was in so much pain. I thought, oh my God. But then normally they followed up with a good kicking, but that didn't happen to me. And as I lay there, they didn't kick me. Normally they would kick you, jump your head, and give you a good hiding, but it didn't happen. And as I lay there, nearly try to hold the sick, and you know what I mean, the feeling started to come back in my thigh. As I lay there, and they were laughing at me and joking and all that, and as the feeling came back to my leg, as I stood up, I just headbutted the one that kicked me in the face, punched the other one in the jaw, and his little mate run away. And then when those two hit the deck, I then kicked to living daylights out of both of them. As I said, I'm a quiet man until to annoy me, and that was it. I had a little bit of a reputation in the school then, you know what I mean? So people didn't annoy me, and people then started, oh, he looks like he could be a little bit of a hard man, and that sort of a thing, by the way. So they want to become your friends. I mean, boys all love to hang about with somebody that's a good fighter. That's what it was like in Glasgow as well. But I was not like these other ones. To me, that was just defending myself. You know what I mean? I didn't start to go bullying people. I've seen that happen so many times. people who had been bullied, and then when they retaliated, beating somebody up, they then became bullies themselves, which was not on. So that sort of thing was going on all the time. Also, the masters, I mean, like they used to give you a shower 2 or 3 times a week. So all the boys would be in having a shower. There'd be about 40 boys all naked. We'd all get waiting to go into the cloakroom to get our clothes on. But you were never allowed in. We all had to stand naked in front of the master, one at a time. And if you imagine the showers were in one room, the cloakroom was in another room. So you had to stand there, put your hands out in front of the master, show them your palms, turn your hands round, let them see that, stand up against the wall, spread your legs, let them see your backside was dry and clean, turn around and let them look at you naked. Then you were moved on to get dry. Now there was no need for all that, by the way. As an adult, I now know what was going on, by the way, when you were a kid. But that was just normal. But we know now what was going on, Jack. You know what I mean? With these men, by the way, they were leering at us and all this. But to me, I was so naive. That was just normal, Jack. You know what I mean? So this was going on. And sometimes the queue was so long that the boys who were at the end of the queue, by the time they got up to be inspected by the masters, they were completely dry. They were bone dry, Jack. That's how long you were waiting in those queues for those men to leer at you. And they never touched you or anything like that. You know, though some of that was going on as well. But I personally never saw it for the masters. But it was rampant amongst the boys. Boys were getting molested all the time. It was normally the 13 and 14-year-old boys hitting on to the ones that are a bit younger and all. You could go into the toilet and somebody was getting sexually abused. You would walk over the ground and there was a kid getting sexually abused with 2 or 3 boys. They were always, it was rampant. I mean, I would love to say it was the masters that was doing it most of the time. But in my experience, all I ever saw really, it was the boys that were doing it. You know what I mean? I remember when, just before I got out, there was sometimes kids would come in who came from broken homes like me, but they had committed no crimes. But because the social workers had nowhere to put them, they would chuck them in with us. And I always felt sorry for them. I deserved to be there, Jack. I was a criminal. There was a lot of kids in there who had never committed a crime in their life who were stuck in there with us simply because they'd come from a broken home. Maybe dad beat mum up or mum was a prostitute or something. That's the reason they were in. And those kids were very vulnerable. Sometimes you would get a kid who was as young as 8 was in. I remember one night just before I got out, I heard this little boy crying. He'd been put in. He was only in for 2 or 3 days. But I remember another 15-year-old boy jumped in the bed, and I got out of the bed. I really lost my rag, grabbed this scumbag with the hair and just belted him all over the place and said to the kid, "Don't worry about it." For the next 2 or 3 days, that little boy hung on to me like I was the godfather or something. He was terrified, but I was glad I helped him. You know what I mean? And then he was moved on where he should have been. He should never have been in there in the first place, by the way. But that's the sort of thing that was going on all the time, Jack, with the boys. It was boys on boys that was doing this. You know what I mean? I was lucky. I'd started to get a little bit of a reputation. So people were scared to come near me, even though I never bullied anybody or said anybody. I've been like that all my life, as I've said earlier on. It's only when you annoy me, you see the bad side of me. You know what I mean? But in general, if I can talk you out of it, Jack, if I can talk you out of it, don't do this and don't do that, I'll do that. But sometimes people see that as a sign of weakness. They think you're afraid of them and all that. And then they learn the hard way when you start on them. You know what I mean? But that's what it was. So I was in that approved school and and then I run away. I mean, they used to let you play football out in the big concrete yard and you would kick the ball. Sometimes balls would get kicked up onto the roof. And people will go, sir, can I go up? And sometimes the master would say, "You're not going up because the last time you were up there, you were absconded." And one day he picked me, Jack, no health and safety. Up the drain pipe we went. The master had us going up the drain pipe. So you would climb up the drain pipe, you would get up there, and normally you would find about 10 or 13 balls that have been kicked up there over the last 2 or 3 months. And the only reason you're sent up, because that was the last ball we had to play with. So somebody had to go up and get it. But as I said, up the drain pipe you went. So you would kick all the balls down, you would kick them down. And just at that moment, on the spur of the moment, I absconded. You know what I mean? And legged it. Went straight to the motorway in Mount Florida in Glasgow and hitched it to London. I was obsessed with England when I was a child, Jack. My mother used to say to me, "If you mention England one more time, I'll slap your face." I thought England was the greatest and coolest country in the world. I could not wait to get to England, especially to London. I wanted to go to Carnaby Street. I thought I was going to meet the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, or at least Twiggy. know what I mean? And the streets were paved with gold, and I was going to pick fivers off trees. I thought, wow, England's a place for me. Down I went. I got a lift to Lancaster. I always remember a big truck driver. And he sussed what was going on. He says, have you run away from home and all that? I went, no. Have you run away from Borstal or something? I went, no. He said, well, I'm an ex-Borstal boy. You've run away from, and I admitted, yeah, I've run away from a school, crew school. He went, don't. And he gave me £1 note. I thought that was very kind of him, by the way. And he dropped me off at what do you call it? A service station. It was called Charnock Richards or something it was called. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And they dropped me off. This is 1969. And I was 14 years of age. And then I got another lift. And then this guy picked me up in the car. He was a solicitor, and he was offering me £10 to come to a hotel with him in Leeds. And I went, I'm not interested in that. And he pulled over in the motorway, dumped me on the motorway, and legged it. Cars were flying by all over the place. And this woman pulled over and said, what are you doing, son? You're going to get killed. So she gave me a lift. But she was a very inquisitive woman. I realise now she was concerned about me. What are you, son? What's going on? I said, oh, I'm okay. I'm just hitching it down to the next town, etc. and all that. So she took me into a motorway station and she bought me some food. And then she said to me, I'm going to the toilet, but I followed her and I seen her on the phone. So I knew she was phoning the police. And I understand, Jack, it was a woman concerned about a little boy. I understand that. Now, I would do that myself if I'd seen a child of 14 or 13 on the motorway at night time. So what I've done is I've run out the motorway and there was a truck leaving and I just jumped to the truck and said, you're going to London? As luck would have it, he was going to London. Took me straight to London, dropped me off in the West End. I mean, and I remember walking the streets and wow, this is great, you know what I mean? And, you know, great, now what am I going to do? I didn't know what to do. I still had that £1 that the truck guy gave me, you know what I mean? So that quickly went, you know what I mean? So I had nowhere to live. I'd never been in London. So I started sleeping in Richmond, Regent's Park and all that, under bushes. I was a very determined little chap. I had nothing to get back to. I mean, if I went back to Glasgow, I was going back into the approved school. So I didn't know what to do. So I started stealing milk from doors in the morning and loaves of bread. I can still see me crushing a whole loaf of bread up right now and eating it. I mean, and you know, sort of like drinking it with pints of milk. And I sort of gyrated towards Soho. You know what I mean? And there was sort of like fruit stalls and all that down there. So I was nicking an apple here and this and that. And for a whole week, that's how I lived, by the way. You know what I mean? It was sort of like sleeping in bushes or sleeping on a bench. I remember one night, I was sleeping on the park bench and a couple came along and I was scared. And I jumped under the bed. Anyway, this couple who were a courting couple were lying on the bed and they were having it off with each other. And there was me under the bed. I thought, oh my God, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I chuckle it now, but then they went away. And then I got lucky. I mean, I remember one day I was going through an arcade in Soho. You know what I mean? I was hungry, you know what I mean? Milk and bread and all that, whatever, and an apple. And I seen two people who I thought were women. And they would look very glamorous with all their makeup on sequin dress. They were fabulous, you know what I mean? And as they walked by me, for a second, I thought I recognised one of them. And as I looked, they said, what are you looking at? I said, is your name William Brown? And they went, my name's not William Brown. What astonished me, but there were men dressed up as women. I had never seen nothing like this in my life. I was so astonished that men had makeup on, wearing dresses, etc. And I thought I knew one. And he went, my name's not William Brown. I went, oh, sorry then. I mean, anyway, they walked away. Then they stopped and they came back and said, where did you get that name from, William Brown? I said, well, if you're not William Brown, what's the point? Where did you get the name from? I said, well, I knew a guy in a approved school. And he went, wait a minute, I know you. You were in Thornley Park. This William Brown had been in Thornley Park, but he was a much older boy than me. And he had left and he became what I now know. There were male prostitutes. This one was calling himself Jean Harlow and the other one was calling himself Mae West. And I, you know what I mean? And they said to me, you hungry? I thought, oh yes, too right, I'm hungry, you know what I mean? And we went into a cafe and they bought me fish and chips and all that. And I was so hungry, they bought me fish and chips again. And I thought, oh, it was wonderful just to have something to eat, you know what I mean? And I got talking and he was saying to me, what, you're on the run? I went, yeah, where are you living? I said, I'm living in sort of like in the park. I don't know anybody. And they said to me, do you want to earn some money? And I remember naively saying, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to put a dress on and wear makeup, do I? They started to laugh. Oh, no, you don't need to wear a dress and wear makeup. He said, have you ever heard of Carden? I went, no, what's that? He said, what it is, by the way, like we'll give you a card with a phone number in it, and all you've got to do is put all these cards in phone box all over Soho and any part of London, and for every 100 cards you take, we'll give you £5. I thought, well, that sounds okay. He said, but don't try to cheat us, because for every 100 cards that we give you, we know that only 10% is going to phone us, by the way. So if you just chuck them away and we get no phone calls, we know you're having us over. And what it was, these two were male prostitutes, by the way. And what they were doing was like, they would advertise men's services, and they'd have the word men in italics. So when somebody seen them in the phone boxes, they knew it was for men. So they were given, I thought, wow, great. And then he said to me, like, the Mae West one, who went on to become a lifelong friend of mine, Mae West, you know what I mean, said to me, you said you're living in a park, and he gave me an address of a squat in Finsbury Park. He said, go up there, just say you're a friend of mine, and they'll give you a room. And I did go to Finsbury Park, and it was wonderful. After about, 10 days or something, a week to 10 days lying, sleeping in a bush or on a park bench, I went up there, and they gave me a room, and it was one of the people in there, they were all like thieves, and there was a couple of prostitutes. There was a black, the only honest family in the whole house was a black family from Jamaica, Dolores, and she was a wonderful old woman. She was always making me, like Indian food and all that. Make sure that child is something to eat. She was wonderful. She really was. They were the only honest people in it. I mean, there was Black Willie. He was robbing like. I don't know if people might not realise it. Back in the 70s, when you got your dole money, you used to get it in cash. Well, his little gang was robbing them, by the way. They all got 5 or 6 years for that. Then there was somebody called the Gas Man. He was wanted all over Britain for, he used to get a job as like a manager of British Gas here and British Gas there. Then he would rob the safe and the warrant would be out from that. I mean, and like there was another guy called Eddie. He was going round all day. He was a con man, stealing sort of teller, not stealing. He was getting them on the Never Never and different names and selling them on. So that was the environment I was in. And I had a room there, by the way. I mean, thanks to Mae West. So I had somewhere to stay. And then I started going round down to the West End with all these cards. I mean, you must have seen them, Jack, hundreds of, like phone numbers and telephone boxes where people were at. I don't know if it's like that in Norwich, but it was like that in Soho back in the late 60s when I was there. And people would get you a telephone box, by the way, you know what I mean, and phone up a number. But you had to take care of yourself because other people had other kids doing that. So they would go and take your card out, rip up and stick their card in. So you had all these little wars and punch-ups that was going all the time. So if I seen somebody sort of like throwing my card out, I'd go sort of like mad and throw heads out, and punches would take place, fights would take place. It was like a little mini war amongst a bunch of little kids, you know what I mean? And I remember one day I was trapped in there. This guy came up with a big cross, and he was screaming, "This is the devil's work," and all that. And he was a huge, big, fat guy, and I could not get out the door. He had me shoved up in, and he had a cross on, you know what I mean? Like Sodom and Gomorrah and all this sort of stuff, you know what I mean? And like, it was only like this other girl who lived in the flat that helped me, and we managed to run away, but it was quite a frightening experience. What I was really worried about is they managed to hold me in that phone box. The police would capture me and take me back to Glasgow. So that's how I was making money, by the way, Jack, was doing things like that. And of course, I was introduced to there's a lot of sex shops down there, man. And like you were getting known. I would go into the sex shop. Mae West again put me onto it. You know what I mean? And I would go in there, and they would give me a video, and I would take it to sort of like Swiss Cottage, and they would give me £2. I never knew what was in those videos, but I guess they were dirty videos. You know what I mean? You would go there, I got to know the tube system in London like the back of my hand. I used to nip in there, not pay it. They always gave me my money on the tube. I pocket it and just run in and sneak in. I went all over London taking dirty videos here. I'm only 14 by the way, at this age. And that's how I was living. I mean, you got to know all the guys. Sometimes the cops would come down and raid, these shops and all that. And I mean, and I remember Mae West explaining to me, "Oh, that's all for show, by the way. All those videos that they take out, that's just for the TV and the publicity and all that. All that stuff goes back later on." I thought, wow, this is someplace. This is Soho, you know what I mean? And I got to know that little area, by the way. And there was a lot of other kids there, by the way, as well. They'd come from Britain, all over Britain and Ireland, and all. A lot of kids had run away. You know what I mean? A lot of people had, especially girls, for some reason, always seemed to be abused by a stepfather. It was always a stepfather that seemed to have been touching these girls up, and they would run away. They would come to London, and you got to know all the sort of similar faces, by the way, Jack, with these kids. You know what I mean? And you became friends with a lot of them, by the way. You know what I mean? Then one day, like maybe a kid would disappear, and you think, oh well, Joe's been caught. That's probably him, sent back to wherever he's come from. And then you had kids that had been thrown out because mum had took up with a new boyfriend, or mum had got sort of married a new husband, and just threw her kid out. I mean, I've got 4 kids, Jack, and I love them dearly. To think that you were going to throw your 13-year-old daughter out just because, like, I get married to another woman, astounds me even to this day. But that sort of thing was happening. I mean, it really was a wicked place, that Soho, back in like the late 60s, early 70s when I was there. But it was an exciting place as well. The smell of it, the smell of Soho in the early 70s, late 60s in your nostrils really was something else. It's all changed now. It's all fancy. It's gentrified. But back in those days, by Christ, it really was something else. You know what I mean? So this is how I was making money, carding, getting a couple of pounds for taking a dirty video to people. And if you think about it, some of your audience might be thinking, oh my God, this kid was only 14, look what he's doing. How on earth did he ever end up in that environment? But I did. And a lot of people might say, well, that Mae West has got a lot to answer for. But I absolutely adored Mae West. If it wasn't for him, I would have had nothing to eat, nothing whatsoever. It was him who got me a room in a flat in Finsbury Park and all the rest of it, by the way. He really was a good friend to me, by the way, you know what I mean? And what I always, and as I said, they were homosexuals, these guys, you know what I mean? But they were male prostitutes. They never tried anything. The only thing guys that ever tried anything with the kids on down in the West End was married men who were leading secret lives, by the way, that the wives had no idea whatsoever, by the way, and they were the ones that were after the kids. The gay men were great. They never did nothing like they were in relationships with their own partner, by the way. But you had a lot of kids. They used to have like what we called the money game. You would get these guys who I've just mentioned, who are married and looking for kids, and the kids would say, oh yeah, I'll go with you for 10 or 15 pounds. The idea was they had to show you the money. There's none of this, by the way, like, well, come in my car or anything like that. That wasn't part of the rule. The rule was, do not go with these guys under any circumstances. Let them see the money. So they would say, I don't believe you've got £10, show me. As soon as he opened up his wallet to show the £10 to the kids grab the money and then they run for their life, by the way, sometimes with this guy chasing them. And that's how these kids were making money. They would steal it and all that. You know what I mean? And they were all doing it. Everybody was doing it. It was a good way of making money, but you had to be careful with these guys. But sometimes it didn't work out. One kid, I always remember, little Ginger, he made the worst mistake by getting into a car with one of these guys who took him back to some flat somewhere and raped him. He was only sort of 13, beat him up badly, and he came back, never went to the hospital or nothing because he was on the run to the police somewhere as well. And he sort of he made the mistake of going in with this man. About 6 months later, there was a sort of a revenge took place, because one day we were all sitting in the arcade and little Ginger said, I was sitting there with Mae West, and I mean, don't forget, Mae West was about 40 at the time. And I don't know if people know who Mae West was. She was a famous movie star way back in the 1930s or something. I mean, if people have never heard, Google Mae West, look at the photograph, and that's what this guy looked like. He was a big man, a big East Ender from Hoxton, you know what I mean, who was living a life. His mother never knew he was gay. He couldn't come out of the shell. He knew his mother would have a heart attack if he mentioned what sort of life he had. Never mind admit that he was a male prostitute, and they were violent male prostitutes, Jack. These guys weren't mucking about. They're going to beat you up, take your money off you. But that was their business, you know what I mean? But this guy who raped little Ginger came into the arcade one night, and little Ginger said it. And I always remember Mae West and Jean Harlow, they've grabbed this guy and they have given him some tanking, by the way. There's something surreal about seeing two men dressed up in makeup with their wigs all falling off and beating this guy up, calling him a pervert, you know what I mean? And gave this guy one hell of a doing, by the way, you know what I mean? So all us kids, we were loving it. We thought, yeah, go on there, mate, give him a bit more of that. So he got a good bashing that night. But that's how kids were making their money as well, Jack, you know what I mean? It was that sort of environment. It was a violent environment. There was a man down there, one name always popped up. He was sort of like the king of Soho. Oh God, what was his name again? He was the one that was controlling all the dirty bookshops. He was the one that was paying up all the cops. Oh, I forget his name now, but he was a big shot anyway. And his name was always popping up. His name will come into my head shortly, I hope. But that was the environment that I was living in, by the way. And I was getting, we were making sort of maybe 10, 15, 20 pound a week. I mean, that was all right for a sort of like a kid in 69, because I don't even think a working man was maybe getting 20 pound a week. I don't know what they were getting, but it couldn't have been much more than 20 pound a week. So we were doing all right. We were eating well, we were living, squatting. So that was sort of like how I ended up in Soho and got to know these people, by the way. I met my first fence when I was 14. Like, we used to call him Louis. He was a black guy. He's well dead now, but he was a ringer for Louis Armstrong. And we'd sort of like, he was a fence. He used to say to Louis, anything you get, son, whatever it's jewellery, whatever it's TVs, whatever you get, I'll sell it. I'll give you the best price. Don't go to anybody else. Come to me. So here I am at 14. I've met my first fence. I've met male prostitutes and all that. And bearing in mind, I thought I was going to meet the Beatles, the Rolling Stones and Twiggy when I went to London. But these were the people I met, you know what I mean? So I didn't mind meeting them because they were fun. They really were. They lived life on the edge. And I like those sort of people. I went on to live the life on the edge of my own life when I became more and more deeply involved in criminality. But that's how I got to know London, Jack, you know what I mean? That sort of way of life. I don't know if you've got any questions. Anything?
I think you've pretty much covered the lot of it, really. I mean, to be what I would say is to be a child in that and be forced into that situation. It you would have had to. I mean, you grew up quickly anyway, so. You sort of had that that ability to sort of, I suppose, be a social chameleon. I found that in a lot of people that I've spoken to, or a lot of people like myself, who've been through a certain life. Pretty much nothing that will shock us.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, similar to you, I went to I was in the special school system, and it was the school called Wenvale. It's in the middle of a town called Pontefract, which is a mining town, and for about a mile all around, it's just like fields and small estate. I'm only about running. This was at a time when you had CDs were first being like cloned, and so knockoff CDs, more tapes, VHS, like the ones, and we got to get a lot of porn. So me at 14, 15, I'm like yourself, I'm running porn around Pontefract, and getting paid a few quid. So it's. I used to. There was a few of us that did it. We go over the back wall and then drop the package off, and then take the money from underneath a stone, and then go, because we were told never to go into the houses. So I mean, I can really identify with you there. So you're on Soho. You're 14 or 15. And you're doing all this. When did you next get sort of?
Well, that was basically. Pardon me. That was basically like what I was doing. But of course, all good things come to an end. One day I get caught. You know what I mean? Like sort of like I was wandering. I was in the cage, and the police raided, and they rounded all the kids, and I was rounded up. So the game was up. They knew, like, with my Scottish accent, that I wasn't a local. They found out that I'd run away, so I was taken back to the approved school. And the funny sort of thing is, I'm just going to jump forward here, because when I was nicked for other serious crimes many years later, this cop said to me, like, I remember you. Don't you remember me? And I went, no, I don't remember you. No. And this man, I remember him telling, he was one of the ones that had went in and they had arrested that John McVicker, the bank robber. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was telling me that, by the way, I'm in my 20s now when he's telling me, he said, don't you remember me? He says, I was the cop that took you back to Glasgow. I didn't recognise him. And then he was telling me, he said, look there, yeah, now you've just been nicked. And he was telling me how he'd robbed, it was him who went in and put a gun to John McVicker. Whatever he was telling me the truth, I don't know. But that's what he was claiming. They'd put a gun to John McVicker's head and they arrested him when he was on the run, you know what I mean? No, that's what I mean. So that, and they was sort of like both, well, no, look, now I'm nicking you now. You're in good company, a Nick McVicker. Of course, this is much later in the future, but this is what he was saying. I know you. And then I did remember him, Jack, when he told me about it. He was quite a kind guy to me when I was a kid. He took me back up. So I'm back up in Scotland. I'm up there. Eventually I got released, but you had to have a job. And this was the only job I ever had in my life, by the way. I went to work in the central station. It was delivering newspapers. Vans used to come in and deliver. I used to work for a newspaper called the Evening Citizen. So my job was when the van come in and I would take it up to the trains and they would take the latest edition to all parts of Scotland, to all the little small towns. They would get these editions, you know, the big city editions of the papers. And if you missed the train, then that means that maybe some little person in a town somewhere in Scotland wouldn't get the newspaper that night. So you had to be on your toes and run up and do that. I mean, I quite enjoyed it. But even then, I couldn't keep my thieving hands together because I had a good little racket with some of the van drivers who would steal hundreds, you know, newspapers out the main office. And when it came to us kids, they would give it to me. He would say, look, I want, say, like £10 for 6 bundles. So we would give him that. And then I would go to my brothers, my friends, and I would say, look, for every newspaper you sell, you would get you'll get a quarter of it. So it was a nice wee rack. I was pulling in at least £20, £25 a week out of that alone. I mean, my wage was only £6.35 a week. Sorry, £5.35 a week. So I was getting more than quadruple the wages by stealing these newspapers. It was a good little racket, by the way, and everybody was at it. So I'd done that, you know what I mean? But I still had London on my mind, by the way. I couldn't get London. As I said, I was obsessed with England. To me, England was the greatest country in the world. There was no place like England. You know what I mean? I absolutely loved it. I mean, I know I'm Scottish, and a lot of Scottish guys might not agree with that, but I'm different. I used to cheer the English football team and everything on that. I mean, you know, even my daughters to this day say to you, Jack, you're a traitor, Dad. You're not a real Scotsman. You're cheering England on, all that sort of stuff. They tease me mercilessly about it. But that's what I was doing. It was a newspaper job taken up, by the way, and I'd done that for a while until, like, as I said, you had to get that job or you weren't getting out, Jack. So I'd done it and I was there for a while. But London was always on my mind, you know what I mean? So by the age of, I was 15 by this time. Once I'd been in that job a few months, I just up sticks, said goodbye to my mother, I went back to London, you know what I mean? So I've got down again. So but by this time I'm a bit more clued up. I know the squat scene. So I go to Finsbury Park and all that, you know what I mean? So I'm in there and like I get to know all the old faces there. It was nice to see the old gang again. They were nice to see me. As I said, the only honest people in that house was a black Jamaican family, Dolores. She was like a second. In fact, she was a better mother to me than my own mother was, you know what I mean? She was a wonderful person, by the way. I can still hear her voice, her Jamaican accent shouting down, as that child had something to eat. And she'd come down and give me all sorts of food. That's where I got the taste for, you know, like Jamaican food and all. They were wonderful. There were 2 other fellas there that worked in the British Rail, Stumpy and George. One was the brother-in-law, and one was sort of like the what do you call it, the husband. And they come over what's now known as the Windrush generation, you know what I mean? And they were wonderful people. They were so kind. I'd never experienced such kindness in my life. They were wonderful people. They really were, by the way, you know what I mean? And they were always trying to get me a job in the railway, but that wasn't for me. As I said before, I had no intention of becoming a butcher, a baker, or a candy maker. I was a little thief. I knew what I was going to do. That was good. And that's what I wanted to do, you know what I mean? So I'm back there. I'm back in Finsbury Park, you know what I mean? And this is leading me up to my next conviction. So by this time, like, by the way, I'm down there. So I'm no more sort of like putting cards and sort of like, what do you call it? And sort of like phone boxes and all that. I decided that was no longer for me. That was no more. So I started moving into screwing shops, you know what I mean? And smashing grabs and jeweler shops, you know what I mean? So I started smashing them, you know, hammer through the window, grab all the jewellery, off you went, me and my pals, you know what I mean? Bum. And that went on until I get caught again, you know what I mean? I made a fatal mistake, you know what I mean, that a pal of mine worked in a big store, you know what I mean? And it was full of TVs, etc., etc. But the alarm system wasn't working right, and it wasn't due to get fixed until next week. So we decided to screw the place, you know what I mean? So they had outside the shop a huge big, it was like an air vent, but an elephant. It was so big, that air vent. I know I'm exaggerating by saying an elephant could go through, but it was big. So I went through it in there. We've got the van round the side. My pal, you know what I mean? We've bust up in the back and we're putting TVs. There was even a small little sort of like, what do you call it? What do you call those? No, it wasn't a piano, those organ type things. I thought, oh, we'll get that. And it was, we were clearing the whole shop. There was a fortune there, you know what I mean? This was the big mistake. The alarm had been fixed, but my pal never knew it had been fixed, and it was just never mentioned. So the silent alarm had went off to the police station. So as we were putting all this stuff in the back of the truck, we were surrounded by the police. So my two pals got away. As I made a mistake, as I made to run for it, I was rugby tackled. You know what I mean? And dragged into the police van. Who's your other pals? You know what I mean? Now, this was the first time the police assaulted me, by the way. You know what I mean? They had me in the back of the van, busted me in the mouth, pulling my hair. Who's your man? I don't know who they are. Don't treat us for a mug. And really worked me off. Gave me a good hiding, by the way. You know what I mean? But I kept my mouth shut, by the way. You know what I mean? Not because I was particularly tough or brave. It's just that it was the fear of going to prison, Jack. That's what kept me going. They could beat the crap out of me all they want. I would rather that than go to jail. But I'd been called bang to rights. There was no, I wasn't going to get out of this. You know what I mean? So at court, but I'd made other mistakes, by the way. One of the jeweler shops, by the way, when I threw the hammer through it, it bounced off the window, and I only get my hand up in time with gloves on to protect my face. But the glass cut through the glove and cut my finger, and I left a fingerprint on the glass. So that's what got me caught. So when I went to court the next day at Tottenham Magistrates, like they gave me a conditional discharge, and I thought, wow, what does that mean? He says, "You're all right. You'll be all right. Don't do it again, and you'll be free for a year." And I thought, great, but I didn't get out the cop shop. The cops, I didn't get out the police. The court. The cops were waiting for me. There's other jobs you've done. So they took me back to the police station, gave me and worked me over again, by the way. And I mean, you've done this, you've done that. It's you, it's done all those jeweler shops. It's you, it's done all this, these other shops. You done it. They beat me up and they beat me up. But I denied everything and they couldn't prove it. So they nicked me for a jeweler, two more shops in the jeweler shop. And they're saying there's all those jeweler shops, you've done them. So anyway, I'm up in court again. And they took me to the Assizes court in Middlesex, you know what I mean? And so he's there, like, I've got 3 charges, like, and the cop turned around and said, look, we believe he's responsible for at least another 11 jeweler shops. And fair play to the judge, turned around and said, wait a minute, has this man been charged with these 11 other jeweler shops? And he went, no. Well, stop it then. How many has he been charged with? 1, Your Honour. Well, that's what he's getting dealt with today. Don't tell me if you think he's done another 11. Have you got proof he's done these 11? And they went, no, we've got no proof. What? Well, stop it then. So anyway, so I got a bit of a result. Now, I was only 18 at the time. If that had been if they got me at 21, I would have got 4 years. He gave me 6 months in the detention centre. And I thought, wow, here am I, so I'm doing 6 months, right? You know what I mean? That wasn't the end of it, you know what I mean? So I gets in there. They sent me to a place called Latchmere House. Then, they remanded me to Latchmere House, you know what I mean? And then they sent me on to Blantyre House. These were detention centres. These were kind of tough places. These were places for 18-year-olds back then, but they used to call the sharp lesson, you know what I mean? So you would do that sort of thing, you know what I mean? And I'm in there. I remember my very first night in there, and they used to take you to the canteen to give you a canteen to get your toothpaste, whatever, cigarettes, and not cigarettes, it was tobacco. So that was kind of decent because most prisons, when you get into them, you've got to wait until canteen day comes. So you could, if you're a smoker, you could maybe wait 5 days to get a cigarette. That I mean, and but they used to take you the first night to make sure you had a bit of tobacco. And as I was waiting in the queue, this big black guy came up to me, and I mean, huge big guy, you know what I mean, and he handed me a note. And as I read the note, it said on it like toothpaste, sort of like tobacco, packet of sweets, and custard creams. And as I read it, I thought, what was this all about? And then the penny dropped. He was telling me to, out of my canteen, he was bullying me, that I was to get this for him. You know what I mean? And I always remember saying, custard fucking creams and just nutted this guy on the face and then pummeled him to bits on the bloody floor. Everybody all jumped back. Even the screws jumped back and said nothing. Because I found out later that this guy was a notorious bully, this big guy. But he'd run into the wrong man, Jack, and I left him nothing. A screw later on was so pleased that he got a hide. He gave me a half ounce. I took the half ounce, but I gave it to another con because I was taking nothing off screws. I was too anti-authoritarian to have anything to do with those guys. I just gave it, you have that, mate. He was delighted. But this guy, you know what I mean, was trying to bully me. And this is what he'd been doing all the times and getting away with it until he'd run up to the wrong man. And again, that got me a bit of a reputation in the detention centre. And people were saying, well, he's done that. He done him, who was frightened off, by the way. So I was in there. And the next night, you had to march for free. They had this policy like a march. And they used to put big army boots. And they marched up and down the square. But you could see through the windows in the square, Jack, there was it was a TV room. And you could hear sort of like, you know, what was on the TV. And as we were marching up with these boots, left, right, Top of the Pops was on. And I can always hear ABBA singing Waterloo. Do you remember that song, Waterloo? Every time I hear it on the television, when I hear Waterloo, it takes me back to Blantyre House Detention Centre. So that was the procedure for 3 weeks. It was march left, right. God knows what that was going to, how that was going to rehabilitate us, by the way. But that was the philosophy back then. And Waterloo, as I said, every time I hear Waterloo. So after 3 weeks, you're then an old lag. You're put back in, you're put into the detention centre. And I thought that was it. And then I got another bit of bad news. The police come up and charged me again for another jeweler shop. This guy that had grasped me, you know what I mean, and gave evidence against me. So they gave me another 6 months in top for that. So I was doing it. It was a year, and I was absolutely gutted because I had my in my mind what day I was getting out. So there was this guy called Paul Lee had stuck me in again, you know what I mean. So there I was. So that was it. And there was a guy there. Oh, he's a terrible man. He was a very, very religious man, this screw, you know what I mean. And you can never, all you ever get out of was like, Jesus says, okay, fair enough, by the way. I mean, Jesus this and Jesus that. But he would say things to you like, by the way, that your blood is stained with Satan and all that. And if you ever had kids, my advice to you is get them, either don't have kids, get a vasectomy, or at least get them adopted, because you are definitely going to pass on your tainted blood, the devil's blood, to this guy. Now, I put up with all this, by the way, because really I wanted to punch him right in the nose, but that's just silly. That would have been more time. So and then he used to open up Bible classes, but nobody, if he had tried to have been a bit of a decent guy and say, look, I'm a religious man, let me introduce you to Jesus, maybe somebody would have listened to him, but not the way he was doing it, by the way. This was an evil guy, but this was a guy who was definitely, by the way, all for the old eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth sort of a guy. So he used to say this all the time, and he was a bully. And when he opened up his Bible class, nobody went. I could still see him now nearly crying. Anyway, to cut a long story short, when I got out, he came with us, by the way, you know what I mean? And he was taking us down to the train station. That I mean, we were going, there was me and two other cons, and he was saying to us on the van, when you get to the train station, don't be getting in the buffet bar, don't be getting a drink, don't be doing nothing and all that. He was saying to us, you know what I mean? And you know what I mean? And he gave me a letter of introduction to some factory somewhere, a brick factory or something. He said, I know this man, you'll get a job there, just mention my name. Anyway, we got to the what do you call it, the train station. And as we got there, we were on the platform. He's waiting to make sure we got on the train, right? And one of the guys says to him, like, is it all right if I go for a toilet, sir? And I said to the con, pardon my French, what the fuck are you asking him if you can go to the toilet for? We are free men now, by the way. We don't need to ask this guy for anything, by the way. How much money have we got, boys? Free, let's go in. We went in, we all get beers, and I went right up to him, by the way, drinking a can of beer, by the way, you know what I mean? And drinking it in front, and the veins were popping out of this screw's head. They hated, they wanted to kill me, but he didn't have the guts to do it. Anyway, and I always remember, he gave me, you know, I said, like, an introduction to a job, and I remember throwing it at his foot and said, listen, you cunt, telling me my kids are stained with the devil's blood, and you fuck off, you mug, you're nothing to do with me. We all jumped in the train and off we went. To the day he dies, he'll never forget the way I spoke to him that day. He's probably long dead, gone now. But he was there was something wrong with it. This was a man who had took religion to the extremes, by the way. You know what I mean? You know, it was always like, you're going to burn in hell, you're going to do this, and you've got sort of like there's a demon in you, by the way. Oh, that's what he was on about all the time, by the way. You know, funny enough, I'm going to fast forward a bit of demon. I was with my wife, but I married him out, and I was up in Blackpool one day. And a girl come up to me. She was an Irish. You know those ones that tell you those little posies and all that, know what I mean? And tell you your fortune. And she'd got a couple of anyway. I said, no, I don't believe in all that. And she said to me, like, no, please, look, give me £1. I'll just put my hand in your heart, by the way, like, and I'll tell you your whole life. Oh, and for a bit of fun. So I gave her a couple of quid, and she put her hand on my heart, and she jumped back like she was in agony and screaming and run down. She threw the money back to me and said, the devil's in you, and run away. I thought, oh my God, maybe that screw was right. I don't know, maybe I do have it, but I'll never forget that. My wife said, well, what's going on? I could still see it. And her friend was saying, what's up? Get away from this man, get away from this man. There's a demon in him. And they run away up and they run away and left me on Blackpool Beach. I only remember that little story because I was just telling you what the screw does. But so I sometimes chuckle, think maybe that screw was right. The devil was in me after all. But yeah, so I'm back to London now. Know what I mean? You know, I'm out of the detention centre. Know what I mean? I'm still not 21, so I'm not been to the men's prison system yet. Know what I mean? I've still. Know what I mean? So like we're out there, and of course, as I said, I've no intention of working. So it's back to the old haunts, back to the old friends. Nora, of course, I'm nearly turning 21 now, by the way. So I'm it's a case of like I'm no longer a 14-year-old boy. You know what I mean? My mind is completely developed. I want more money and all that. You know what I mean? And this is how I got my first sentence. You know what I mean? Where we'd been in a sort of pub one night, fight. It broke out. By the way, a riot took place. You know what I mean? And what was sort of like funny about it when the fight, I was fighting with the governor. He jumped me and all that. He grabbed my new sort of leather jacket and ripped it and all that. And I started to give him a hiding and all that. And a riot broke out. And there was a bunch of Irish lads there who had nothing whatsoever to do with us, jumped up and went fight. And before you know it, you had two completely different crowds fighting, two different fights simultaneously who didn't know each other from Adam, punching up. You know what I mean? So what had happened was like the fight broke out, by the way. You know what I mean? Sort of like a safe was robbed of £20,000, by the way. The police said it was all staged and all that, by the way, to get that money. But we all got away. But as I was running out, I was rugby tackled by a guy who was a post office man. And but he was a part-time, would you call it, a wrestler. He was a wrestler, by the way. And I said to the man, look, mate, what are you doing? He said, I'm making a citizen's arrest. I said, look, I've just run out of that pub. I don't know what's going on, but I'm just as frightened as anybody else. And the guy said, well, in that case, you've got no problem waiting with the police, then, have you? I said, look, I'm not waiting for the police at all. I've done nothing wrong. Take your hands off me or else. And they say to me, or else, what? I'm a wrestler. I'm an amateur wrestler. And I said, I don't care what you are, mate. You better take your hands off me. And at that moment, I heard the Black Mariah coming in the background, you know, like the old one, not that the new ones have got now. And I panicked. And then I just beat this guy to a pulp. I fractured his face. I fractured his ribs. I broke his arm, his ankles. The guy was in a bad way, you know what I mean? And off I went. You know what I mean? I got away. But my brother Brian was caught. You know what I mean? But Brian had played no major part in it. And they never knew he was my brother. So they gave him bail and I'd legged it. But I get caught months later because I was in Oxford Street one day. And the guy that I attacked seen me in Oxford Street. And of course, I've not seen him, and he's following me. But I jumped on a bus, and he lost me. But he took the bus number and phoned the police. And I had only one stop to go before I got up. No, the bus was surrounded with a lot of police. And I thought, what's going on here? I had no idea that anything it was anything to do with me. The police have come up the stairs, and then out comes, the postman, the amateur. And when I recognised him, I thought, oh my God, there's that guy, a bastard. He came in, put his finger on me, said, this is a man. So I was nicked for GBH, 2 ABHs, an offensive weapon, stealing £20,000 and causing an affray. These were the charges against me. So I was off to Brixton prison, you know what I mean? And not looking good. And I thought, right then, I'm going to get a few years out of this, etc., you know what I mean? So I'm in Brixton prison, by the way, and it was, Brixton prison was like, this was the day on remand. You could still get alcohol in there, Jake. So if you had a visit, you could get half a bottle of wine, or you could get a can and a half a lager. They always opened the cans up in front of you. So you know, to let the gas out, they would pour it into a cup. You would take it back to your cell, by the way. But that cost murders. It was bullying going on for the beers and all that. People would take it off you and all that sort of things. And of course, if you were in Brixton, Jack, I could go. If you didn't get visits, I could go up to you and say, look, I'll get you a visit, get you some goodies, but I want the beer. So you would be happy. You were getting cakes and biscuits or sweets. But the deal was I would take the can and a half of beer, or you could sell the beer, by the way. I mean, I remember one guy under his bed, he had about a dozen cans with a tissue stuck in each of them, hoping the gas wouldn't escape. He was going to save them for the weekend. God knows what they tasted. We all know what flat beer tastes like. Even if you've got a tissue in it, the gas is still got out, but they still drunk it. That's why beer was kicked out of the prison system in the end, because people were getting drunk, causing trouble, beating the screws up and all the rest of it. So it mucked up for everybody else. But in the late 70s, you could still get alcohol only on remand, Jack, only on remand. So I'm in there, by the way. I'm in Brixton prison, and sort of like, you know, my brother Brian gets captured. He ends up in there with me as well, by the way. You know what I mean? So we're waiting to go to the Old Bailey. You know what I mean? And as I said, it was a case of like, I remember one day, it's funny how things stick out in your mind. I remember like, we were listening to the radio one day, and it keeps saying on it, a special announcement, then the music would carry on. I mean, a couple of minutes later, special announcement, there's a story coming in from America, and this was happening every 5 or 10 minutes. We can't say nothing yet, but there's a big story coming in from America. And we were talking, what the hell's going on in America? We thought a war had broke out or something. There was something going on. Something terrible was happening. And they were saying, hold on, folks, we're just getting it verified. We were all in, you know, the hairs were standing up. I'm like, what's going on? And then Elvis Presley has died. Ladies and gentlemen, the king is dead. Elvis Presley has died. I repeat, Elvis Presley has died. And I'm a bit of an Elvis fan, but I was absolutely gutted, you know what I mean? I thought, wow, Elvis is dead, by the way, you know what I mean? And all that night, they just played Elvis music on every single Elvis song that had ever been done. It was on the radio that night. We were all a bit unhappy, you know what I mean? We had a few cans of beer, by the way, because I was always buying drink for cons as well and drinking it. And everybody always bought them. I don't know if you still get it now. You know, Carlsberg Special Brew. That was the strongest lager at the time, by the way, Jack. So people would buy that because you got a better buzz out of that rather than the weaker lager. But that's what it was all out. Then we were there, and it was okay. And Brixton, as far as prison's concerned, it was some guy started a craze up with the Ouija board. They were sort of like contacting the dead. It was a con man kidding on. He was getting in contact with dead prisoners from Victorian times and all that. But it spread all through the wing, and people were getting addicted to it. And people are saying like, this guy would spell out somebody's daughter. He's obviously heard the daughter's name somewhere. But when the guy spelled out, he thought the guy was telling the truth. But it was a con. He was getting tobacco for it. He was getting this. But it spread all over. I mean, I remember one guy running out his cell screaming, he's just told me my son's name. How would he know that? It must be the truth. And I remember saying, look, mate, he says, this is a con going on. You don't believe this nonsense. He's getting tobacco out and all that. He's obviously heard your son's name somewhere along the line. But, of course, the governor banned it. Not that anybody bothered the backside of it, what the governor said, by the way. You know what I mean? They'd done it anyway. You used to get, you know, in the plastic bowl, people would get a plate, draw a circle around a plate, put the big plastic bowl over it, draw another circle around there, and write Roman numerals around it and all sorts of numbers from 1 to 9. And that's how they contacted the spirits. It's all nonsense. One guy told me I was going to get a not guilty. I'd never got a not guilty. I get found guilty, you know what I mean? But it was all nonsense. But people were really getting freaked out, and that's why the governor tried to put a stamp on it, if you know what I mean. But nobody listened to what Screw's saying. You just do what you're like, yeah, and you carry on. So because we were waiting for the old Bailey, we were a couple of months before we were transferred to Pentonville prison, by the way, because that's in North London. So we gets there. And like, we get in, me and my brother, and we get that. I couldn't believe there was a pool table there. I could not believe there was and I was a big pool player back there. I loved it. It was one of my passions. And I thought, wow, this is great. We're going to get a game of pool. So it was a Saturday morning, and me and my brother went on, and we went to play it. This guy came running out his cell, said to us, look, hey, what are you doing? I said, well, look, we're doing, we're playing pool. He said, nobody can play that until John McQuaid says you can play it. I said, who the hell is John McQuaid? He said, John McQuaid is lying in his bed right now. This is the guy that runs this wing, by the way, and nobody gets to play that pool table until he gets out of bed. And I looked around to all the other cons and said, you stand for this. So you've got this guy lying in his bed. The pool table is empty. It's empty. Nobody's to play it until he says, you know what I mean? And I said to the guy, I'm not. And me and my brother had my name up. He'd rubbed me and my brother's name off it and walked away. And he put John McQuaid's name back up and his name back. So I rubbed their name off the pool table and put my name and my brother's name up on it, right? And this guy came back again, rubbed our names off it again and put his name off it again. So I just went back up for the last time, rubbed it off and said to the guy, if you touch my name again, I'll fucking kill you. So the guy panicked and run round to get this John McQuaid. So we're playing pool. So we know there's going to be trouble. My brother's took his sock off, put a couple of billiard balls into the the sock. He's got it that, and I've got the pool cue. So we're going to give it to this John McQuaid. He's come out, by the way. You can see where he's just been woke up, and he said to me like, "What are you doing?" I said, "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm playing pool." He said, "Well, I don't really care what you say, mate. Hey, you're in your bed and nobody's to play pool. You come out of your bed. What's that going?" And you could see the hate. You could see he wasn't used to being spoken to like this, right? Now, this guy, I found out later, he was going up for trial at the time, by the way. So he didn't really want any trouble. So he walked away and left it, which gave him, it was a bit of a letdown for him, for all his fans. Oh my God, John's walked away. But he wasn't scared of me. He just didn't want any trouble because he was going up for trial, etc., etc., etc. You know what I mean? That was the start of a lifelong enemy, by the way, with that man. I was to run into that man many, many, many times later in the prison system. One night, he tried to kill me in Wandsworth prison, and I had to fight for my life to wipe that guy out, you know what I mean? But that came years later. So that's how I met this John McQuaid. And of course, then I'm playing pool and all that. And we done the normal thing. We didn't bully. Once I get beat, somebody else went on the pool table and I would put my name up and wait my turn. I was no John McQuaid. I didn't do things like that, by the way. But that was the beginning of a lifelong hatred between me and that man. He was a fellow Scot, the same as me. We moved in the same circles as London. It was a Scottish community, by the way, of criminals and thieves, and we all knew each other. But that was the first time I had met him. I goes to court, and I got not guilty on the £20,000 that went missing out of the safe, but I was found guilty for GBH on the what do you call it, the amateur wrestler, ABH on 2 members of the staff, causing an affray, an offensive weapon. So they gave me 18 months for the GBH, 12 months for the ABH, and it all worked out at 3.5 years, but I only done 18 months, if you know what I mean. And it's funny how things stick out in your mind, Jack. I always remember the amateur wrestler guy who stuck me in. When he was giving his evidence, he said to the judge, "I'll be fair to this man," he says. "He actually done me a favour. The 6 teeth that he knocked out were rotten, and so I was glad they were gone." And I always remember the judge said, "Well, that's very well," he said, "but he had no right knocking them out in the first place," which was a bit of a chuckle, if you know what I mean. But down I went. So here now this is the first time I'm in prison now as an adult. So I'm still in they keep me in Penable prison, and I got a job in the canteen. But the trouble with the canteen is the screws were running a scam. So if you bought your tobacco or your bread, or not bread, didn't sell bread, but biscuits, that sort of a thing, it was more expensive to buy out of the prison canteen than it was to buy out of the shop outside. And the cons were always complaining about this. I pay such and such for tobacco out in the shop, and you're charging me 10, 15 pence more for it. But these guys, these ones that complained, were taking down the block, the punishment block, and been given a good hiding, by the way, sort of, Jack, a really battered. I remember this huge, big, fat screw coming up with all his knuckles all bleeding, all dead proud of himself, that having 6 of his pals beat one poor defenseless con up in the block. So people learned not to complain too much, by the way, but some people didn't give a damn. They did complain, but it meant a good bashing coming. It really did. They kicked the shit out of you down in the block, by the way. So I had this job, and I didn't like the job. I didn't like what was going on, and I tried to get out of it, but they refused. I could either have done 2 things: cause trouble, which had just meant more time on my sentence, and I'm not that type of con. I want out as quick as I can. So I'm in the canteen. My job was like a truck would come, and I would take in the sweets, the biscuits, sort of like I ate so many custard creams inside, Jack. To this day, I cannot stand custard creams. That seemed to be the only, them and those other ones, bourbons. That's all I seem to have had all the time. I hated them. And I remember one day, like when I was taking, the truck came in and I was taking all the biscuits in, and this screw said to me, do you know who's down there? And he was pointing to the ground. It was an old graveyard. And I thought, no, who's down there? He went, Crippen. I said, do you remember, have you heard the Crippen, Jack? That was that famous case away back. So I remember looking at his grave. By the way, it wasn't a grave, it was a concrete sort of block, but he was down. And I remember thinking, wow, because he was the first guy that had been captured. If a ship had followed him over to Canada or something, and he was caught because of the new Marconi radio wave system or something, and then he was taken back. He went over there with his lover, who was dressed as a boy. I remember reading about it, and I thought, wow, I'm actually looking where this man had been buried. You know what I mean? So I always remember that. So after a couple of months, I was released again. So I'm back out in the street again. And of course, just back to my own ways. You know what I mean? Sort of like, I don't know if you want to come in, if you're getting to say so far or whatever, Jack.
Yeah, no, you pretty much covered it all. And I'll give you that. It's quite refreshing that for your first podcast you've been so thorough. It's nice to get people that are quite thorough, that will put the full story across. I like to take my time with these. I don't like doing short ones. I like to take my time and get people to just say how it is, because it's refreshing to hear. It's refreshing to hear somebody be so honest and open about their life, but honest and open about how prison was and is for them.
Yeah, exactly. I would say to any man, a woman watching this, for God's sake, don't get involved with crime. Don't do it. Get yourself as best an education that you can, and try and get a decent job, have a decent life, get married, have children, and lead a normal life. Unfortunately for me, that wasn't the way I thought in those days, by the way. I was a completely different man to I am now. You know what I mean? All the crimes I've done, eventually, I paid for them. You know what I mean? I went to prison for them, you know what I mean, etc. You know what I mean? And as I said, that 18 months, there was other sentences to come, and I ended up in worse prisons like Parkhurst, Blundestone, and all these sort of things. You know what I mean? It wasn't until, later on I'd have thought, enough's enough. You know what I mean? But this was what was going on at the time, you know what I mean, in my life. You know what I mean? I'm out again, and as I said, it never entered my mind that I was going to ever get a job, anything like that. I liked being a thief, enjoyed it. It was an exciting life. It was sort of like it was an adventure. I had no remorse for what I'd done. You know what I mean? Sort of like, and that's just the sort of person I was. That was my mindset then. You know what I mean? To me, it was, I wouldn't say glamorous, because there's nothing glamorous about criminality. You know what I mean? Some people, like you see some of these people are talking there like it's, well, they've got this and they've got that and they've got that. That's not glamorous, by the way. They're just ordinary thieves. I admit what I want. I was nothing more than a thief, and a violent one at that, by the way. You know what I mean? But I got my comeuppance, and you sort of like, I fought the law and the law won, sort of thing. You know what I mean? I went inside, I'd done a lot of time, met a lot of people. You know what I mean? But I would never recommend that life for anybody. Prison is brutal, nasty, and thuggish. You know what I mean? The amount of people I've seen stabbed in prison, people have been raped in prison. I've seen people getting their face cut to bits with coffee jars in prison. I once had seen a guy to get out to an outside hospital eating light bulbs. I remember a pal of mine, David Campbell, saying, now look at this. And this guy came in once for prison. Show how. And the guy was a little bit embarrassed. God, show him. I couldn't believe it. He took my light bulb out of my cell, put it in his mouth and chewed it. I can still see all the blood running out of his mouth now, where he cut himself and swallowed it. And I thought, what on earth is going on here? And he said, well, I do this every time I want a little holiday in the outside hospital. They had to take him out, x-ray him, by the way, and sort of like, and give him a few days in the hospital before he was taken back. And I remember saying to him, don't you worry, you're going to kill yourself. Don't you worry, you're going to kill yourself. Oh, I don't worry about that. Now, this guy had done this about a dozen times, and he survived every time, Jack. Every single time. Obviously, the guy's got some sort of a mental health issues. And that was another thing about prison. The amount of people who had mental health issues inside was abominable. The drugs was sort of like everywhere. Heroin, cocaine, thing. I had a pal who got addicted onto on heroin simply by biting his fingernails. They used to bag up £10 bags and sort of like in Wandsworth prison, and bits of heroin was always getting under his nails. So he was chewing his nails all the time. Eventually, he ended up getting a heroin sort of like habit, Jack, and he ended up on the needle. He was found dead in the toilet in King's Cross with a needle hanging out his arm many years later, just because he'd been eating his fingernails, and there was little bits of heroin where he'd been bagging these bags up inside. I mean, it's a terrible way of living. I would never recommend that to anybody. For God's sake, guys, keep the hell out of jail. It's a terrible place. I mean, it really, really is. I'll give you an idea. My first night in Parkhurst prison, I've got there, like, I mean, I'm sort of like, I got a 10. This guy had, he threw my pregnant sister down the stairs. I'm jumping fast forward now, I mean, they got a 10. I left this guy brain damaged in the bad way, this guy. So, bosh, I'm off to the big house in Parkhurst, and I always remember sort of getting through the gates, and I thought, Christ, so it's come to this, right? And I mean, and then I was starting to think, I'm going to end up like a lot of my pals are either dying in prison or ended up, you know, I mean, been a very, very, I mean, I've got a pal who's still in now. He's been in prison since 1962. Anyway, I get to Parkhurst, and as I'm walking up, I had a box on me, and it was sort of, you know, your bits and pieces. And even in the jail, I couldn't keep my thieving hands to myself. I stole quite a few books out of Wandsworth Prison Library, and I put them at the bottom and put my own books at the top. So the screws never really checked. So I've got all these books. It's all history books. That was my passion. And as I'm walking through Parkhurst Prison, I got this big box on my shoulder, and all the cons are looking over the wing. I was on C wing, they put me, you know what I mean? And I remember hearing a guy shouting, "Ow!" And it was a pal of mine, Black George, a good friend of mine from outside, who was doing 8 years where he'd robbed a bank and get 20 grand or something. I mean, it was nice to see him and hear his voice, but it was sad to see him in such a position. And anyway, and what I noticed, there were some people standing in underpants, and I thought, Christ, what's going on here? This guy's got underpants on, just standing with a pair of underpants on. C-Wing was a psychiatric ward at the time, by the way. But because there was so much overcrowding, just like now, Jack, back in the 70s and 80s, there was so much crowding in the prison. They were putting ordinary people, who, when I say ordinary, people who didn't have mental health issues like me, because of us, they chucked you in that wing as well. We were all chucked in, but really, it was a psychiatric ward. There was a doctor there called Cooper, and all the people who were getting the drugs off him were known as Cooper's troopers. I can still see them all lined up in Parkhurst right now, getting Lagacto, what they used to call liquid cosh. They would get their Lagacto, and they'd be stoned out their mind and fall asleep. But they were known as, under Dr. Cooper, as Cooper's troopers. So I'm in there, by the way, in my first night, and I gets invited to what they called a party. Gets in there, a couple of guys that I knew. They were hooch, which was prison alcohol, you know what I mean? And everybody was smoking dope. My pal had a big bong that he'd made out of plastic bottles, were there. This is my very, very first night. So the hooch was going down well. They had the radio on playing about. It was quite a good little party, you know, considering it was in prison. Anyway, I knock at the door, and the bank robber comes in, you know what I mean? And he says to this pal, well, he wasn't really a pal, but this was the guy who invited me to the party. What about the money you owe me for the cannabis and all that? And this guy came from Glasgow, said, look, I've not got it, but when I've got it, you'll get it. Then the London villain said, look, you'll get it now, there's going to be trouble. And the Glasgow guy said to him, look, you're spoiling my party, don't you understand? You'll get it when I've got it. And the little London guy went, look, you'll get it now, or you're getting done. Words to that effect. At that moment, the Glasgow guy jumped up, kicked the door shut, pulled out a lump of wood from under his bed, and then just proceeded to beat the living daylights out of this bank robber. I mean, there was blood everywhere, and nobody was bothered. Everybody was still drinking their hooch. Everybody was still smoking their joys. It was like watching sort of like a bad movie where this guy was just getting pummeled to bits by a lump of wood. And then he pressed the bell, the inside bell. I'll never forget the screws, look at the screw's face. When the screw opened the door, he just threw him right out into the landing, thud, blood everywhere. And we just carried back on with the party. That was my first night in Parkhurst prison. I'll never forget it. I remember thinking, Christ, if I come to some place here, that was typical. That was the sort of thing that was going on in like Parkhurst prison all the time. And everybody was there. Reg Cray was there. A lot of the big sort of like guys that robbed banks were all in there, by the way. You know what I mean? And it really was a very, very sort of like, it was a violent place. It was always somebody getting stabbed and this and that. And you were talking to people all the time, who had deep mental health issues. You had to be very careful what you were saying. I remember a guy walked by me one morning and went, "Hello, Al," and I was stoned out of my mind, Barry. I was on the pub and I didn't really notice the guy. I'd only caught him out the side of my eye. Then he stopped and I could hear what he was thinking practically. Al's not fucking acknowledged my good morning. So he's run down the wing, went up the back stairs, come all the way down the landing, run down, come down the front of the stairs, come all the way, walked up to me again. "All right, Al." I went, "Oh, Bill, how are you going, mate?" And then he was okay then. "Oh, all right, Al, yeah, good. And I went away. This is how easy it is to get shanked in prison, Jack. He would have went back to his cell and think, "Well, Al never said hello to me. Then he would have worked himself up and up and up and up, and convinced himself that the reason I never acknowledged him is because I hate him, that I'm going to do him." And then he would get it into his head, "Well, I'm going to do him first." And that's how it happens, Jack. You're sitting you're in the landing, the queue, waiting to get your dinner, and all of a sudden somebody comes running out of there and you're stuck in the back. As simple as that, by the way. It's that easy, by the way. You had to be on your toes all the time, who you're talking to with these people. You know what I mean? Because they get paranoid over it. There was a man there, like, you know what I mean? I didn't actually see this, but he was writing a letter to his girlfriend, I was told, and somebody walked by, just said, I can't remember the girl's name, I just said Dorothy or something, and he wrote, "Dear Dorothy," and this lunatic thought he was writing to his wife, and killed him, stabbed him with a broom handle, dead. No, I mean, his wife just happened to be called Dorothy as well or something. I mean, that's not the real name. I can't remember the name of the person now. I mean, I never personally witnessed that. One of the other cons told me that happened before I got there. But that's the sort of prison it was like. It was all sort of like, you know what I mean, you know, the second day in prison, they take you over to see the doctor. You get there, by the way, and you're talking away. And this guy was talking to me, very pleasant, I mean, middle-aged man and all that, I mean, and you wait to see the doctor, and it's nothing special what we're talking about now. Then I went out to and you get checked up with the doctor, and I came back out and this guy was gone, and another con come over and sat with me and said, "Do you know who you were talking to?" I went, "Who's that?" I said, "That's Reg Cray." I was shocked, Jack. I really was shocked, but not because it was Reg Cray, it was how he looked. He was very haggard looking. He was very thin in the face, which is understandable. The man had been in prison for about 15 years by that time, you know what I mean? And it was nothing like those, you know, those wonderful photographs you see in the 1960s with the twins and all that walking up here. It was nothing like that whatsoever, by the way, you know what I mean? And that's how I met Reg Cray. 2 minutes later, I saw the Yorkshire Ripper. He walked by, but he was separated. There was a big metal gate, you know, in Parkhurst prison. And we were waiting to see the doctor on one side of the railings, but on the other side of the railings were where the hospital wards were. And that's where they'd kept the Ripper. And his face was still very, 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 where it had been cut open with a coffee jar by a guy called Costello, a Glasgow guy. He ripped his face open there. And I could still see the scars all on the Ripper's face right now. And I remember thinking, yeah, you deserve that, mate, after what you've done to them poor women, you know what I mean? So I was delighted he got it, by the way. I only seen him for a couple of minutes and he moved on. But every time I think the Yorkshire Ripper, I always think that's all the Yorkshire Ripper and Reggie Cray for the very first time on the same day. And that's that. When I got in, when Reg again, I'll carry on with him. I knew him in Parkhurst prison. Nothing like what you read in the papers or what you see in movies. It's a very quiet, inoffensive man, very polite, by the way. I liked him. I mean, I had many a conversation with him, but as I've said to many people before, me and Reg were not friends. He never discussed his life of crime with me. I know no more about his life of crime on the out than you do, Jack. You know what I mean? Only what I've read, of what I've heard. I know nothing about him. The conversations I have were humdrum things. Like, I remember one day we were down by the TV room was on C Wing in Parkhurst. The TV room was little place down at left-hand corner, but there was a little cooker room there. And I remember one day, well, he was cooking sausages, and I had sausages as well. We were sitting talking, and I remember him telling me, saying like he was hoping that one day that maybe him and Ron's going to get out. They're going to get a little house down in the country. That's what he was hoping. That was the sort of conversations I had with him, Jack. And unfortunately for that poor man, by the way, hey, that never happened. The two of them died in prison, which really is ridiculous. When they could let people that call him Pitchfork out, who's raped and murdered two little girls. He gets out, and there's Reg Cray, was left to lie in prison to die of stomach cancer. I mean, it was terrible. Reg loved Hooch. Hooch was like prison. That he was addicted to it, by the way. Everybody was. I remember one day he came up to me, and there was a bit of a dry up in Parkhurst prison, Jack. The yeast was always getting stolen, and the screws were getting better at protecting it and hiding it. So there was a bit of a dry up, by the way. You know what I mean? And I remember he came up one day, the hair of the dog, he was dying for a drink, and he said to me, like, do you know if there's any hooch about it? I said, Reg, there's nothing. There's no yeast. He said, I've got to have a drink. I'm dying for a drink, you know what I mean? And I understand that sort of a feeling. When you're dying for a drink, you're dying for a drink. The old hair of the dog's good. I said, Reg, there's nothing. He said, for God's sake. I said, look, I've got a jug down. I buy it off you. I said, Reg, it's only down 3 days. I said, you can't drink. He says, I'll take it. I said, Reg, you'll need to have guts of King Kong or something to drink that. Normally with hooch, you can drink it after a week. But if you can leave it down for 2 weeks, or even preferably 3 weeks, great. But the trouble is, it stinks the whole jail out, and the screws can find it. And you've got to be, so you have to have a good hideout for this stuff, that I mean. And he said to me, I'll give you a quarter a puff. I said, Reg, it's 3 days old. And he said to me, I don't care how. Anyway, I thought this is a good deal, but I gave him the couple of jugs I had, and he had, I got the puff. I went down to see him later on, where Reg was in Sea Wing. It was a little alcove kind of thing. It wasn't like the landing, if you imagine cells, Jack. His was a different little bit. There was about 6 different cons in this sort of it was a little alcove sort of thing. And he was down there, by the way, you know what I mean? And he had a table outside. I'll never forget it. He had a table outside his cell door. And he had cups and saucers there. You know what I mean? Proper cups and saucers. And the hooch was in the cups and saucers. And I went down, and he offered me in the cup. Oh, no, Reg, I told you it's 3 days old. I can't drink that. And him and his mate, they just sat and drunk. I could still see Reg with his pinky out. Like the posh people do. They've got. It was surreal. It really was surreal to see him sitting there just drinking that. And that's the Reg Cray that I know, by the way. He had a cell. He called it the Blue Lagoon. And if you went into his cell, there was photographs of Diana Dawes or, Joe Lewis, the famous boxer, or maybe Barbara Windsor. And they were all signed to Reg with love and all that sort of a thing, by the way. He had a big Chesterfield chair. I remember sitting in his cell. There was a bed there. But what really stuck out in my mind was his little pewter ashtray. It was about 2 or 3 inches high with cigarette butts. It piled up, Jack, you know what I mean? It's funny how things, there's Reg Cray, probably the most famous gangster in England. And what I really remember with that scene was all those cigarette butts piled up in his ashtray. That was the Reg that I know. I never seen any violence from Reg Cray, by the way. Reg Cray was getting on a little bit, by the way. People didn't really bother with him because he was a figure from the past, if you know what I mean, Jack. You know what I mean? He was respected because he was so famous, if you know what I mean. But I've heard, you know what I mean, he's done this. Well, I seen nothing of that. He might have been violent in other prisons, or he might have been violent when he was over in the special unit in Parkhurst. But I saw none of it. I know nothing of that at all. All I know is that, what I saw. I remember when a friend of mine died, and he heard about it, and he came up and offered his condolences. And I thought that was a really nice touch. By the way, he'd done it. He came up, I've heard all about you. And I thought that was a nice touch. That was the Reg Cray that I knew, by the way. I mean, sort of that was, I can't give you tales of violence of Reg. I saw none of it. I mean, all my stories are really humdrum little things like that. You know what I mean? So I remember one day he was arguing. Well, he wasn't arguing. This guy was arguing with him. You know what I mean? Shouting. I heard shouting one day in the landing. I went out, and there's this guy shouting there, and Reg just walked away and done the right thing and ignored him. Reg was in a bad position. He's a life. He can't afford to get caught fighting because any chance he's got of getting a parole, Jack, will be gone. You know what I mean? They're going to say, look, he's still violent in prison. So that guy who was shouting at him was really out of order. And I went up to the guy and said, that was a bit of order, Bill. Well, why'd you speak to him like that? You know what I mean? He said, well, I don't like him. He cut my sort of in the East End, he cut my uncle or somebody. I mean, I don't know if the guy was telling me the truth or not, but that's what he was claiming. But Reg's done the right thing and walked away. But what I remember about that guy, as I said, it just like I've explained the cigarette butt, the cigarette butt on the pewter tray and Reggie's tray, how things stick out in your mind. Because when he was shouting at Reg, he had the door was open, and up on his wall was a huge poster of Margaret Thatcher. It was massive, and that still sticks in my mind. So there's this guy shouting at Reg Cray, and there was this huge big poster of Margaret Thatcher. Next door to him was a guy who shot the Israeli ambassador back in the 80s. it was a Muslim guy. He was a complete gentleman. I liked him, by the way. I used to call him Mohammed Mo. And he used to make, he was allowed, he made his own food. He used to make curries. He used to give me a carrot curry. Oh my God, this guy was some cook. Carrot curry, any sort of, because he was a vegetarian, he didn't eat meat. He made it all out of vegetables. And by God, this guy could sort of like cook. And up on his wall was a big photograph of the Ayatollah Khomeini. I always remember that. I can still see the big white beard and all that, by the way. And he was in for shooting the Israeli ambassador. It was part of the Palestinian Liberation Army or something. The next cell to him was a Scottish guy that killed a copper. And up on the wall, in his wall, he had the photographs of the dead copper where he had bashed. And I remember saying to myself, look, I know he's a copper, but you really have to have that guy up on the wall. It was absolutely disgusting. Hey, it's his cell if he wants to put photographs of dead coppers up, because in those days, like if you commit a murder or whatever, you get the crime scene photographs, Jack. So he had the crime scene photographs up in his cell, by the way. So that was that down the corner was the IRA, by the way. You know what I mean? I used to go down and see them, by the way, like, you know what I mean? And there was one IRA guy there where I had, he was a little fella, and there's a big sort of like guy there called Bruno, who was a bit of a bully, trying to hit the little IRA guy. And one night he was sitting in the what do you call it, the TV room, the little IRA guy nipped up behind him with boiling water in it and sugar. You know what I mean? Now, if you pour boiling water with sugar on your skin, it just disintegrates your face, Jack. It just takes everything off, you know what I mean? And he just poured
I've seen it personally.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm talking about, Jack. And what an
napalm, yeah, it's
that's what
awful.
they called it. That's what they called it. And I could still see this guy. His hair just melted. His face melted. What a horrible thing. But that's what happens when you get, if you're going to muck about with the IRA. You know what I mean? But that was a typical sort of like people that was there. There was another guy there, they called him Captain Birdseye. He killed his wife and buried her in the fridge freezer, covered her up with, what do you call it, fish fingers. That's how he got the name Captain Birdseye. And what he'd done is he'd sort of like, he'd done it for the insurance, and he was nipping off to Spain all the time. She'd been lying in that fridge freezer, covered in fish fingers for 2 years. But when he went to Spain one day, like, and there was a power cut in his house, so everything melted. So they had to force his house to come in, you know what I mean, to fix out what was going on. And they found her body in the fridge freezers, in a melted freezer, floating with. So he got lifed off. And you know the funny thing? You must have seen those adverts, by the way, with Captain Birdseye. He looked like Captain Birdseye. He had a big grey beard. All you needed to do, Jack, was put the uniform on that guy, and you'd have thought you were talking to Captain Birdseye himself. He was a ringer for them, by the way. That was the sort of people who was in Parkhurst. There was a guy there that killed his kids. They were the most horrendous. There was people in there that raped their children, people that murdered their own kids. This is the sort of people I thought, wow, that was Parkhurst prison, by the way, in the early 80s. You know, and they're all the famous bank robbers were there, by the way. You know what I mean? Like the people that chainsawed open, you know, like armored trucks and all that. That was the environment you were in, by the way. I remember there was one guy that came up to me, he'd raped a 4-year-old boy. I gave him a good hiding. You know what I mean? I thought, what? Don't talk to me, mate. He'd raped not only was it a 4-year-old boy, it was his own nephew. He raped his own 4-year-old. I remember giving him a good hiding, by the way. You know what I mean? So, I mean, but that's the sort of environment. I mean, I'm jumping now. That came much later in my sort of like criminal career. But I was just giving you a little idea how sort of like what Parkhurst prison was like when I was there. I seen an unusual sight one night as well. I remember a screw was walking by, and he had his dog. It was sort of late at night, and I was just bored. I was looking out the window, and somebody shouted, "Screw!" And as he looked up, do you remember those big PP9 batteries, Jack? Those big batteries. People used to use
the square ones.
Yeah, those big square ones, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I seen a huge big battery come flying out. Obviously, it was meant for the screw, and it hit the Alsatian dog right in the head, knocked it out. I felt so sorry for it, by the way. The screw was going ballistic. He was calling them everything under the sun. He didn't know who'd done it, but it knocked the poor Alsatian out, kaput. And people, there was budgies all over the place. They were, oh my God, you know what I mean? Budgies. I used to walk down and, you know, you'd have a jug of water, and the budgie would just come jumping right into your jug of water and start to have a bath and all that something. They were all over the place. People would sort of like, you know, keep budgies. I remember going to see this guy one day, and I was talking to him, and I leaned on his cell door, but I didn't realise there was a budgie on the cell door. And as I shut the door a little bit, it decapitated the budgie. Oh, I felt awful. I didn't know where to put my face. I could still see this little thing, his body flickering all over the place. And the guy was looking at me like, oh, like he wanted to murder me, by the way. And I thought, I've got problems here with this nutcase. I'm either going to have to do him on the spot, or hopefully I can talk him out of it. I said, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't know what happened. I know you're selling them for 2 ounces. If I give you 4 ounces, will you be happy at that? And he was saying to me like, well, I've had it as a baby and all that. And that was my favorite one. And he was really, you would think he was talking like it was a child. And to some of these long-term cons, Jack, it was a child. That was their only company. But he accepted the 4 ounces. And I was pleased because I had 2 things. I was going to either, he was going to kill me or I was going to do him. And for the sake of 4 ounces, it was over and done with. Nobody got hurt, and I moved on. But I did feel so sorry about that little budgie. I can still see it with no head, flickering sort of like all over the place. There was another budgie that gets sold. They called it Hercules. It was the biggest budgie you ever saw in your life. And they sold it to this guy for 4 ounces. As soon as it got out on the land and it crashed into a wall, was killed. The budgie was blind. They couldn't see where it was going. This guy had conned them. That caused a lot of trouble, by the way. The guy who sold the budgie got stabbed for that, know what I mean? A blind budgie, you know what I mean? Never told the guy it was blind, know what I mean? So, and it just flew straight out and into a wall and was killed. That was sort of, that sort of thing was common, by the way. I remember seeing a guy with a glass all the time, running all over Sea Wing and Parkhurst and capturing flies. And my curiosity it was a black guy, my curiosity got so better me. I thought, what is going on here? I'd seen it for weeks. You would see him, he'd run up with a glass. As soon as there was a fly, he would put his glass on the wall, capture the fly, put a little bit of paper in between the wall and the glass, capture the fly and take it back into his cell. And I went to his cell and I went, look, excuse me, mate, you can tell me to bugger off if you want. What's the score with the flies? And he took me into his cell, and up in his wall, he had a huge, huge cardboard box, super glued or glued onto the wall. And at the front of the wall, you could see a plastic piece of plastic paper on it, and you could see right into the cell, and he had spiders in it. And this is what he was doing. He was putting the spiders in. He went, watch this. I'll never forget it. There was a little fly clinging for dear life at the top of the box. He just hit the top of the box. The fly must have been stunned, hit the bottom of the box, and the fly was on him quicker than you've seen bolt and run. I've never seen nothing like it. This is what he was doing. He was feeding his spider, and he used to have spider races and all that, by the way, betting. Him and all the black boys were in the cell betting on what was the quickest spider and all this sort of thing. I mean, it really was a surreal place, Jack. It really was, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They didn't send choir boys there, by the way. It was the worst of the worst in there, you know what I mean? But that gives you a bit of an idea what Parkhurst prison was like, by the way, you know. And you could get cut up for the most, you know, I always found it shocking that somebody could get cut up for, say, a £2 deal of cat. They used to sell £2 deals in Parkhurst. It was so small, but they would squash it with their thumb. And if you looked at it, it looked a decent size. But once you squashed it back up into its original size, it didn't even make half a joint, by the way. It was so small. And I've seen people getting stabbed over that. To stab somebody over something that you wouldn't even pay 10 pence in the street for. You know what I mean? That was the mentality of people like that, by the way. It was a shocking place to live, and you had to be on your toes all the time. I had a big shank hidden. Out in my cell in Parkhurst, I'd got out, you know, I put my hand outside my cell and scraped all in between the bricks, all the cement out, and it took me ages to, and I hid my shank in there. You know what I mean? I never had to use it, thank God, but it was always there in case I had to protect myself. Everybody had a weapon. Everybody had a weapon in Parkhurst prison. It was the only way to survive. You know, luckily for me, I never had to use it, Jack, know what I mean? But it was always there just in case I did have to use it, know what I mean? But that was typical of what Parkhurst prison was like, by the way. It really was a Sodom and Gomorrah. And there was one guy there who had, up north somewhere, he'd tied up, put a chain around a disco or something, you know what I mean? And put petrol in, and a lot of people were burnt to death. And this guy was a vicious rapist. He was a sexual predator, by the way. I mean, he would try to entice guys into his cell, buy them, you know, toys, not toys, like a watch, give them food and all that, by the way. And he was always buying them presents, and then he would rape them after a while. I mean, there was a catalogue in Parkhurst prison called K's Catalogue. So you could order clothes, you know, like shorts, trainers, all that sort of a thing. Or you could get your own clothes handed in. But most people like me, I bought mine out the catalogue. You could order socks, sports shorts, trainers. So everybody walked about in shorts on and trainers. That's what everybody wore in Parkhurst. Unless you were really poor, you had to wear the prison gear, by the way. To be fair, some people deliberately wore the prison gear. They wouldn't give in to buying sort of like any trainers. They thought, well, I'm in prison, I'll just dress like a prisoner. And that's fair enough. They could afford to buy the stuff, but they refused it. But that's what it was like. It was just a little idea what Parkhurst prison was like when I was there. It was horrendous, and you had to really be on your toes all the time. As I said originally, until we turned up because of the overcrowding, it was a psychiatric ward. So 40% of the people in Parkhurst were mental health issues, by the way. Were waiting to go to Broadmoor. They were waiting to go to Rampton. All these places, they were just waiting for a place to go to mental health, you know, to Broadmoor. So you had to be careful with these guys, by the way. They didn't. There was a guy there called the Screaming Skull. I'm not exaggerating, Jack. It was a bag of bones. You thought you would see it was a walking skeleton, and he used to always go to the TV room demanding to get what he wants to watch on the television. Everybody hated him. He was always running to the screws and grassing everybody, but nobody bothered with him. He was an idiot, you know what I mean? But he was run to the screws and say, they won't let me watch such and such a place. And the screws would always say to him, you know, look, they don't like you, don't go in there, we keep telling you. And sometimes they would grab him and just throw him out. I remember one day I was walking by, Jack, and I just seen him come flying out the TV room. Thud, he hits the deck, gets up, runs to the screws. They've thrown me out the TV room again. And again, it was the same old pattern from the screws. We keep telling you they don't like you, don't go in there. So that's an idea of what Parkhurst prison was like. I don't know how you'd like to comment on that, Jack, but it was surreal. It really was.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some violence myself, and you know, one thing I will say, whatever you choose to call them, you know, old lags or seasoned prisoners or whatever you want to call them, it's the look. You can always tell somebody that's been there for a long time, because it's the look in the eye, it's the shuffle when they walk, it's how they hold the shoulders, their head down, and you know these people are just institutionalized. It breaks my heart to think about that now. You know, I've seen people that I used to respect when I was a kid, you know, and I've seen them go from these big hard men to just institutionalized, and when they eventually did get out, they get bullied or whatever, because they've just had the hope knocked out of them. And prison back then, like I'm talking about the prison late 90s, early 2000, then you know these people would, you know, ghosts of men. But now you look at prison these days,
it's different world.
And it's totally different. I mean, were it not for men like Alan Lord giving their own freedom for, you know, sat on roofs and you know, doing it that way to actually highlight you know, humanity in prisons, there wouldn't be any.
That's right.
Do you think it's too easy now?
Oh, definitely, Jack. I mean, don't get me wrong. I wish I could got PlayStation 5s and all the goodies that they're getting now. If it was offered to me back then, of course I would take it. In my day, you got a radio, and you had to work hard to get that. It was a radio you got and nothing more. I mean, I enjoyed the radio, but that was it in my day. And of course, if you spoke to older men, sort of like, they would say, oh, there was no radio in my day, by the way. No, I mean, you're lucky you're getting that. No, I mean, that sort of thing, you know. I mean, I met this old boy, by the way, in there. To me, I always try to avoid the well-known villains like the Plague. I'm a sort of a stay in the background type of guy. Don't annoy anybody till they annoy me. Keep out of the way and try not to cause any trouble. But I met this old boy, and it was quite a famous the national media called him, or what was it? They called him Robin Hood. No, sorry, I'm telling a lie. Yeah, no, what was it they called him again? I can still see him with his big white beard now. Yeah. They called him Robin Hood. What he'd done is he used to drive one of those old, those Sunshine variety vans, and he had a bunch of old pals who were all pensioners and all that. Now, this man was about 82 when I met him, by the way. I was only in my 20s at the time, and he was telling me, and I remember reading about his case in the paper, never thinking for a second I was going to meet him. But what he'd done is he had stole about 100,000 or 200,000 pounds from the council or something and robbed it. And he told all his old pals that he'd won the pools or something. So he was taking them on day trips to all over Britain, to sort of like up to north, up to your part of the world, or Blackpool or Hastings, and he would pay, if they had an electricity bill, he would pay this, he would do that, he would give them wonderful treats, he would take them down to London. There was a bunch of about 12 of them, and he gave them a wonderful time. And of course, they thought he'd won the pools, but of course, he'd robbed the council of all this money until it's only when he got caught and they found out. And this old rogue had been in the prisons in the 1920s. And there was a story he told me that I found fascinating. Just like I had met him as a young man, and he was an old man. He remember telling me about the old Victorian villains that he had met in prison when he was a young man in the 1920s. He'd met men in their 80s and 70s who were jumping about the East End of London when Jack the Ripper was about. Now, I found this totally fascinating, by the way, that I was talking to a man who was talking to men who were alive and were in the East End when the Jack the Ripper murders were taking place. And of course, I asked the $1,000,000 question, did anybody ever have an idea who he was? And he said that everybody thought that it was a local man. It was a local man. And then he told me that all the women were armed. They had sticks and stones. Some had guns. The men were carrying axes to protect their wives and their daughters. They're up their dresses, they're in their corset, their husbands had bricks and bolts, you name it. It was a state of panic. And I found that guy absolutely fascinated. I was actually talking to somebody who was talking to somebody who was alive at the Jack the Ripper murders. So that's the sort of thing I find interesting, Jack. You know what I mean? That old boy, wonderful old man. I remember him telling me when he was in Pentonville prison in 1920, when they used to give you an enamel. They give you a cup of tea at night. That was the last thing you got about 7 o'clock, and there was no handle on the cup. Now, you know what enamel like? It's like a metal, and it was boiling, sort of like the tea was boiling, and you had to stand there outside your cell and not drop it. If you dare drop that cup, even though it was burning into your hand, you would get a savage beating from the screws, and they would keep you there a minute, maybe even 2 minutes, while that was burning into your hand, and then it'd be about turn, quick march, back into your cell. And of course, the relief to put that enamel cup down where it was practically burning your hand off was tremendous. I found that interesting. That was 1920 in Pentonville prison. I liked that old boy. He was a wonderful old guy. You know what I mean? As I said, he's probably well dead now. But I would rather listen to him than listen to the Crays or any of these famous gangsters. All that stuff bores me, by the way. But people like that I found interesting, Jack. You know what I mean? But yeah, he was a nice old boy. In fact, they called him Robin Hood. They really should have called him Santa Claus, because the big white beard they had, all you needed, it was a bit like that earlier on when I mentioned Captain Birdseye. He also had a big white beard. If you'd have put a Santa Claus outfit on him, you'd have thought he was Santa Claus. But that old boy had been a thief since the 1920s and all that. He was an interesting old guy. You meet these sort of characters, by the way. You meet everybody in prison. You know what I mean? All sorts of people. You know what I mean? But it was, that was a bit of an idea that Parkhurst prison was about. But that's me jumped fast forward well into the future. I had other prison sentences before I headed up in Parkhurst, other sentences, you know what I mean? But that was I found that interesting. I don't know if you've how you're feeling, if you've anything to say about that at the moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing that I loved to do was listen to the old fellas, you know, the wisdom.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
It's you know, I use it in my recovery. I use it in, you know, my life. You know, some of these guys are so wise, but they've had to learn that.
Yes.
You know, I remember the I mean, you know, even up into the 90s and early 2000s, some of the prisons were still Victorian, especially up north.
Yes, yes.
So I remember, like, you know, having a radio and cutting the end off the lead and then taking the two exposed ends and putting them onto a razor and then breaking a
Yes,
match into the razor and then putting the cup on it so we could have a cup of tea late at night. It'd take about 4 hours to boil, but you know, things like that. Some of the ingenuity that these old
yeah,
boys
yeah. I mean,
could teach you. But one thing I do want to touch on, you know, I can see it's getting a bit late now, but to really look at turning your life around.
well, I had late. Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, what you know, what I mean. And then, by the way, hey, as you said, it's getting late. If you ever want me to come back on and carry on again, there's no problem. But I'll tell you how I turned my
That would be
I got
fantastic.
married. Yeah, I got married. You know what I mean, I met this wonderful lady. You know what I mean. And well, first of all, I'll give you a little bit. But I used to lie in night. You know, as I said, year after year, night after night, I was lying in my cell, and I was this can't go on. I've had enough. I'd seen men die in prison. My biggest fear was dying in prison, Jack. You know what I mean? I'd seen. I actually had a pal of mine who died the day before he was due to be released. I mean, how unlucky is that? And I'd seen men who had. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have children, but I didn't want to be in the position that many of my friends were, who went into prison when their children were little babies, and when they come out, they were teenagers. I didn't want that. If I was going to have children, I think it's a duty of a father to be there for those children. Now, if I'm going to carry on with my criminal career and all the money I was getting and all the great times and all the women I was having, that's all fantastic. But the time comes that I wanted more out of life than that. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have children. I really did, you know what I mean? And as I lay there night after night after night, think, look, you've got to change your life. You know what I mean? But it's easier said than done, because once you come back out, Jack, as you know yourself, most of you just go back to our old haunts. They don't give us any money. There's no program to help you get. So you're back out on the street and you get back in with your old mates who are then tempting you with easy money. Look, oh, I've got this going, I've got that going. And you think, wow, okay. And before you know it, you're in the jail again. So I decided I was having nothing like that. And so I didn't know what to do. But at the same time, I'd never had a job in my life. So I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? And one night, like, I was out with I happened to, like, my sister. I said to her, like, she wanted to go up for a drink, and she turned up with this girl. One of them, she was a real beauty. I thought, oh my God, look at her. Know what I mean? And I sort of like thought, wow. So sitting down, and I got to know her. She was a manageress in a sort of an off license sort of a thing. So we got talking and all that. Know what I mean? And from that night on, we were joined to the hip. We were married a couple of months later. Everybody said, don't go near him, by the way, like he'll dump you, he's always be different. But 33 years later, we've got 4 kids, etc. And that, I mean, so that's what it was for me. And she was good for me, by the way. And she jokes herself, Al, if it wasn't for me, you'd be dead or you'd be in prison, by the way. So that's what it was for me. It gave me a bit of, when my first son was born, oh, I was so proud, by the way. I really was, you know what I mean? I've got 2 sons and 2 daughters. And then we had 4 children in quick succession. And that, I gave it all up. I never committed another crime again, by the way. I got out just at the start of 1990 and never committed another crime, but I still had to make money. So what I'd done is I was asked to take over a very rough pub, and it was a very rough pub. But because of my reputation preceded me, I managed to deal with all these guys were in it. Nobody else could control it. So I controlled it. And I made a decent living out of it. I could afford to sort of like give my kids a holidays. I could do this, I could do that. But it was because of her, by the way. It's sort of like, that's what I needed. I needed that sort of stability, because there's no doubt if I hadn't have met her, I would have just went back into my old routine, back into the old way of life, back with my mates, out with different women every night, having a great time. You know what I mean? And sort of like either shoving cocaine up my nose or a bit of amphetamines. No, I mean, I was never really a big drug taker, if you know what I mean, Jack. But to me, it was a recreation thing. If I was out with you tonight and have a couple of lines, I'll have a couple of lines, but I wouldn't go and buy it the next day. The next time I had a couple of lines, I maybe bumped into somebody 2 months from now. And that sort of way it was for me, Jack, because I've seen too many people fall by the wayside on drugs. I mean, that was one of the biggest changes I'd seen when I came out. I mean, I went in at the beginning of the 80s, came out at the end of the 80s, and the drug scene was rampant. People were making fortunes. Now that's probably what I would have done, by the way. If I hadn't get married, I would have moved into that scene because I knew everybody that was involved in all that, by the way. So what I had to do, Jack, I had to give up all my family. It wasn't just a case of getting married. I had to leave the old environment. I mean, I got a bit of a scare. A cop car pulled up one day. I was only recently out. Now, I mean, 4 cop cars got around me. Oh, you're back out, are you, by the way? Well, get this straight. And they whipped out bags of heroin out of their pocket and said, look, the next time we see you, we're going to put these bags in your pocket and say you're dealing. Get out of our manor. We don't give a fuck where you go. Get out of our manor. So that was enough for me. Me and her just get married. We moved out the manor. I left behind my sisters, my brothers. I completely gave up my old life completely. I never committed another crime again in my life. We got married. Wow. We're still married 33 years later, and you're in love, etc. Love my children. I have 2 wonderful daughters who twist me around their thumbs. I've got a 3-year-old little girl, a granddaughter now. She's the love of my life. I call her my little English Rose. She's a wonderful little thing. You know what I mean? I absolutely adore her. So that's what it was for me. And I would say to anybody who comes out of prison, I know how hard it is, guys. I know how tempting it is to get back into the easy money. But if you're going to hang about in the same old manner with your same old friends, there's a good chance you're going to get back into the old habit. Listen to somebody that's been there, done it, and wore the t-shirt. Give that life up forever. Get out of it. Get yourself away from these people. They're not your real friends, by the way, even if you think they are. If they're tempting you to do this and do that and do that, get away from them. Get away from the old man. Get away from everybody. If you've got a girlfriend and you're in love, then move on. But for God's sake, get away from the old environment because it's too easy to slip back into it, Jack. You know what I mean? It was for me, and that's what I thought anyway.
It is, you know. There's a saying where I come from, you don't shovel shit without smelling like it.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And it's true, you know. You don't hang about with that sort of person without getting involved.
Exactly. You
know, when I can really identify someone and fall in love. You know, I was an animal when I met my wife. And, you know, I was homeless, going to a food bank. She was serving behind a counter. She had a 3-month-old son. And we hit it off.
That's great, yeah.
And people were going, oh, you know, it's bad news.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
I think I can make my own.
Yeah.
You know, she's like, I can make my own mind up.
Yeah.
We've been together over 7 years. I've been clean and sober.
That's great.
27th of June 2014.
Well done, Jack.
And you know, she's been my saviour. She's been my you know, like you say, she's been my angel. We've been married 2 years on the 28th. You know,
yeah.
I think, yeah, I do believe in God. You know, I have a relationship. I think God put her there because, you know, she was my calm. You know, she's got kids, and I've got a, you know, I've got a daughter, and you know, we live in a small bungalow, and 5 kids in a small bungalow at the weekend is a bit bit noisy and a bit thing, but it's just it's amazing the life that I have now. Being able to speak to people like you, being able to help give a voice to people like you, because I felt like I didn't have a voice for such a long time. And when I started this, it gave me a voice, and then I want to give other people a voice.
That's fantastic.
And it's been so helpful to be able to do this and to be able to get people like you.
Well, I agree entirely with what you're saying. I mean, when I was, I've been writing for the last few years. You know, like, you know, prison stories, giving people, you know, ideas. What I was saying, you know, what was in prison, giving anecdotes, and people was always saying to me, oh, this is really it. Why don't you write a book or something? Well, I can't write a book. What would I know about writing a book? I mean, and this went on for about 4 years. People have always said, but now I've got 3 books coming out, by the way. I've got a ghostwriter who's writing them. My first book comes out next year, then 2 books are following. Now I find that, I find it surreal that there's going to be a 3 books coming out about my life from Glasgow to London, and I still find it incredible that that's going to happen, but it is happening, and I still cannot believe that it's going to happen just because I was writing on a crime forum about stories about my past life, and people were always saying to each other, well, that's interesting what you said, why don't you write? I thought, well, I don't have the talent to write a book, I'm not an educated man, you know what I mean? But it's happening. So I mean, if I can do it, anybody can do it. It just shows you that what you could do if you put your mind to it, Jack. You know what I mean? That's what I see anyway. I mean, as I said, what you've said to me sounds a very powerful story, what you've just said. Your wife sounds a wonderful person, by the way, and I'm so glad that you've got 7 years clean, and it looks like to me you're never going to get back to that life again, just like me. I mean,
no.
You don't need it.
It's only me that can mess that up.
Well, that's right. That's right. No, I mean, it's only you, Jack, I know.
You know, and why would I do that? There's all these things, you know, that we could go into, like self-sabotage and stuff like that. I've mental illness my whole life, you know, and it comes from trauma. You know, I know where it comes from, and these are the things that I'm dealing with right now. You know, I've written books. You know, I've been in films, and you know, it's. I think so, the prisoners and people like us that I've met, that I've done, you know, this is number 35 of this series. Before that, I did about, like I said before we started, about before that, you know, and I've spoken to people in America on their podcasts and stuff like that. I'm just so blessed, and the people that have been in the situation that we have, that have pushed through, it's all the same thing, it's all the creativity.
Yes.
And you know, creativity is the catharsism that we've found. I found this hugely cathartic. I don't go to AA or NA anymore. You know, I sometimes, you know, I listen to stuff online and stuff like that, but doing this is my AA, my NA, because I speak to people that have been through it. You know, 1.7k listeners at times, and it's fantastic. I love it.
You've got something to be proud of. Well done. I mean, do you know what you just said there about one thing? You probably know this as well. One of the things I noticed about in prison with many men was how talented they were. There was painters there was writers, people who, if they were to channel that energy, that wonderful talent that they've got, but never ever had a chance, Jack, you'd never know what they could do, by the way, even without an education. You know what I mean? Like, you know, that sort of a thing. And it's the prison is full of people like that. If they were just to get a chance, Jack, a real chance of maybe writing or painting or you know what I mean, sort of like write an essay or something, it's there. It's there in abundance, by the way, you know what I mean? And sort of like another thing, when somebody once said to me, oh, you must really hate the police. I've never hated the police. The police never put me in prison, by the way, sort of like, Jack. It was me, my behaviour put me in prison. The cops were just doing their job at the end of the day. Okay, they were a bit rough, and I took some hell of a doings off them, and etc. But it was still me. What I knew, it was against the law what I was doing. So they were doing their job and put me inside. So I don't hold it against the police whatsoever, by the way. I've got no hate in me whatsoever anymore, Jack. No, I mean, no hate whatsoever. You know what I mean? As I said, I don't blame the only person to blame for my behaviour was me, Jack. And that's when I met my wife, and she turned my whole life round. There was somebody you could talk to. There's somebody you were in love with. There was somebody you could talk to that you could never talk with. And by the way, I'm a man's man, by the way. I always prefer the company of men, know what I mean? But you could talk with your wife or your partner or whatever, that you could never talk even with your best pal. Know what I mean? It's a different thing. So to me, like yourself, you found salvation in the end, Jack, and I'm proud of you, by the way, even though we've never met before. I'm proud of you for what you've said. You've definitely went through the ropes here. I can tell by the way. I can tell by the passion in your voice, by the way. So I'm well proud of you for what you've done. And men like yourself and me, I reckon if we had had a chance earlier on, God knows what we might have done, Jack, with our lives.
Yeah. I mean, because we don't know how to channel it, and
Yes.
it's a matter of finding that niche, that way to channel. So now is, I'm setting up a community trust called Second Life Studios, which is getting people like you and me, homeless people that have all got some form of creativity that want to look into that, and then investing in them and helping them, write a book or make an album, and then getting them the money to then get so many out there and go and sell on the street, and then they give 10% of that goes back into the community trust. They get to keep 90%. It's like working for Big Issue, but better, bringing in better, because you're bringing in most of the money, and then you people invest in you, then they start investing in other people. It's pay it forward. I've been very, very lucky that people have really invested in me as a person. They've invested in my story. They've invested in my books. They've invested in watching this. It's time. I very rarely ask for money. It's time that I'm looking for, because that is the most precious commodity for me.
Yes.
Time, and that's the most precious thing anyone can give. I'm just so grateful that people take time to listen to me.
Yes.
And people like you, it's great. I've had a lot of fun. I've shed a lot of tears. I've laughed with people. I've cried with people. I've been shocked at some of the things that I've been told, and it's been a massive journey for me as well. So yeah, I'd love to get you on for a part 2.
Yes, certainly, yes.
And a part 3 and a part 4. I believe you've got
yes. Well, you've got my
a lot of wisdom to share.
Yes.
With my listeners. At that, mate, I'm gonna respectfully bring this to an end. And they sorry, we froze there for a second, mate.
Yes,
I don't know what happened there. But, we'll get you back on in the new year for some more stories and some more of your wisdom. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I think that this on that, I'm going to end this broadcast and say thank you everybody for tuning in. I shall see you next time. I'm hoping to get a couple more episodes done before December, and then I'm going to be taking Christmas off. I'm coming back in the new year for series 2. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, Al. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a pleasure to me as well, Jack. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks everybody for investing your time. I'll speak to you in a second. I'm just going to stop the live stream. Cheers, guys. As always, I shall see you.